Hello, listener. The fact you hear this means you're alive. If you're new here, consider subscribing and comment below where you're listening from. Let's begin the story. The first time I realized this lake might actually save me, I was standing on a public dock watching the wind push chop against the pilings while my phone vibrated in my pocket with alerts I didn't bother opening. Sirens were screaming from the highway behind the trees, and people were shouting somewhere up the shore. But out on the water, everything looked dead calm. My name is Tate Winslow. I handle surveys and maintenance around this lake and a few others in the chain. That means checking water levels, walking the shorelines, and fixing headaches before the guys in the office even hear about them. I know every cove and rocky point on this side, but I also know one thing most people don't, which is that there is a small island near the far shore that never made it onto the maps. The Park Service hands out to tourists. I broke ground on a cabin out there 3 summers ago, working weekends and days off when I needed to get out of town. No power lines, no road, no neighbors, just a hump of granite with some scrub trees on it and enough flat ground for a 12x6 frame. I did most of it alone, hauling lumber in a beat-up aluminum boat with a motor older than I was. A few friends came out once, took some pictures, got bored, and never asked to go again. That was fine by me. See, the island doesn't show up on phone apps. If you scan the lake on a screen, it looks like open water. On my paper charts, though, it is a tiny bump with no name and a pencil note I made years ago. Shallow shelf, good anchor, no traffic. When the news started talking about riots and an infection in the city, my first thought wasn't about hospitals or shelters. My first thought was simple. Water slows down everything that walks. Sirens used to be a rare thing out here before that week. A speeder on the county road or maybe a brush fire during a dry spell, but that was it. That evening, though, they didn't stop. One wailed past, then another, and then a third with that dropping tone I'd only ever heard during storm evacuations. My phone was buzzing against my hip like an angry hornet while I tied the boat to the dock, vibrating with alerts I didn't have the stomach to open. The lock screen showed the headlines I'd been trying to ignore all day. Grainy clips from overseas of people in torn clothes and bare feet, faces slick with blood, security cameras catching bodies getting back up when they should have stayed down. The news anchors called it an outbreak, but they always made it sound like it was happening somewhere else. That day, though, there were no calm faces left on the screen, just shaky video and red crawl bars that screamed state of emergency and stayed indoors. The funny thing was the home office acted like the old world was still spinning that afternoon. They sent a generic message about checking water levels at a few feeder streams after last week's rain. Nothing about the infection, nothing about the riots, just normal tasks written by people who still believed the rules held. So I played along. I took the small aluminum boat, ran the nearshore, took photos, and sent notes whenever the signal held long enough to push data through. But by the time the sun started to drop, calls were ringing once and cutting out. Texts stacked up as sending without ever going through. A patrol car rolled into the public launch while I was checking the outboard and shaking the fuel cans. 2 deputies stepped out, looking like they hadn't slept in 2 days. Radios turned up loud and crackled with static. One walked to the end of the dock and just stared at the water like he wished he could walk across it. The other leaned on the hood of the cruiser and watched me, then called out, "Launch closes hard at dark. You got much left to do." I kept my hands where he could see them and said, "Just tying up." He shook his head, spat on the gravel, and said, "City just announced shelters. They're telling people not to travel unless they absolutely have to. Hospitals are locking their doors. Dispatch keeps saying to stay away from anyone acting confused or aggressive. You see anything weird on the water, you call it in. You hear me?" The word shelter landed hard around here. That didn't mean safety. It meant high school gyms full of cats and anxious families, pallets of lukewarm bottled water, lines for bathrooms, and strangers breathing the same recycled air all night. That picture felt worse than whatever was happening in the dark. I asked, "You think it's that bad up here already?" His radio cracked and a frantic voice mentioned the highway. He grimaced and said, "Bad enough. Pile-ups, fights, people running straight into traffic. We're chaining this gate when we leave. If you're going anywhere, do it now and do it once." His partner came back from the end of the dock looking pale and asked, "You planning to sleep out there or heading in?" Nothing like a full plan existed in my head yet, just jagged pieces, the cabin, the island, food, fuel. How many trips could I make before the light died? I said, "Heading in, I'll be gone before you lock it." The first deputy pointed a finger at me and said, "Do it fast. And if you have family in town, tell them to stay put and lock their doors." They left the chain loose, got back in the car, and peeled away with their light bar flashing. Up the hill, the small store and bait shop had every bulb on and every pump running. Miller, the owner, stood out front with his phone in a white-knuckled grip and said, "You seeing this on TV, Tate?" I said, "Phone's showing enough. Is the power still good there?" He nodded, eyes glued to the screen, and said, "For now." My brother's near the city, says people are breaking into pharmacies in broad daylight. You want gas? Fill it now. Filling the truck felt like one more chore, but my hands moved faster than usual, adrenaline making me clumsy with the nozzle. Tank first, then a couple of jerry cans for the boat. Inside the store, I grabbed what I could carry without looking like a looter. Canned soup, beans, rice, peanut butter, coffee, matches, and a couple of cheap lighters. I grabbed a handful of batteries, too, just in case. At the counter, Miller kept one eye on the news and said, "They keep saying don't panic, but they never say what to do." Instead, I paid cash. Credit felt like a promise that wouldn't be kept and told him, "Lock up when you have to, Miller." Between town and the small lake house where I kept most of my gear, the first thing I couldn't explain showed up in the ditch. A pickup lay on its side, nose down, rear wheels still turning slowly in the air. The windshield looked punched out from the inside, shattered outward. No driver stood on the shoulder. No one waved for help. No hazard lights blinked, just the truck and a streak of dark fluid across the gravel that looked too thick to be oil. Every instinct from my regular life screamed to stop, check the cab, call it in. But another voice spoke clear and cold in the back of my head, saying that walking up blind was exactly how the people in those videos died. The patrol car had given me enough rules for the night. Avoid contact. Stay away from anyone acting wrong. Do not add your name to the list of the dead. The wheel stayed straight in my hands as I drove past the wreck. Plan or no plan, one idea settled into place like a heavy stone. Get to the house, load the boat, reach the island before dark. Whatever this outbreak turned into on the roads and in the city out on the water, I still had one spot that nobody else knew about. And right now, that was more than most people had. By the time I swung the truck into the gravel drive at the lake house, the light over the trees was already bleeding out, turning from gray to a bruised purple. The place was small, more of a glorified shed than a home, but it backed right onto the water. And right now, that was the only real estate that mattered. The aluminum boat sat on its side on the dock, motor mounted on a stand, just waiting. I parked tight against the door, nose out, so I could move fast if I changed my mind or if something came down the driveway behind me. The radio in the cab was spitting out pieces of terrified sentences. Quarantine shelters opening immediately. Reports of violence near level 1 trauma centers. Stay inside. Avoid contact. No one sounded calm anymore. It didn't feel like advice. It sounded like people shouting while a tidal wave rolled over them. Inside, the house smelled like stale dust and old coffee. Through the window, the lake looked dull and flat, completely ordinary. The only thing different was how it felt to look at it, like the water was the only barrier left. I dropped the grocery bags on the kitchen table and went straight to the hall closet. That was where I kept the gear that made more sense on the island than it did here. I pulled out 2 sleeping bags rated for 0 degrees, a solid trauma kit I'd built myself, a hand-crank radio that looked like a toy but worked when the grid died, a single burner camp stove with a stack of fuel canisters, and a box of water filters I had never bothered to test. All of it went into a heavy canvas duffel jammed in with wool socks, thermal shirts, reinforced work pants, leather gloves, and a knit hat. Late fall on this lake was no joke. If I got stuck out there with the wrong clothes, the infection wouldn't have to work very hard to kill me. Hypothermia would beat it to the punch. In the kitchen, I stopped pretending I might be back in a couple of days. This wasn't a weekend trip. I went for the canned food first. Anything with a stamped date a year or more out. Beans, heavy soups, vegetables, spam, tuna, stewed tomatoes. Rice and pasta followed, calories that are packed tight. Coffee and salt went in on instinct. I grabbed a bottle of generic multivitamins because a medic in town had once told me that people fall apart faster than they think when their diet turns into nothing but cans and starch. The phone on the counter lit up and vibrated with a jagged, jarring tone I had only ever heard during tornado warnings. An emergency alert pushed through the dead data and dropped calls. Statewide public health emergency. Shelters open at listed locations. Curfew effective immediately. Hospitals at capacity. Avoid all contact with individuals exhibiting confusion or aggression. It urged citizens to remain indoors and await instructions. It didn't say how long those instructions would take to arrive, or if anyone was even left to write them. I stood there and pictured the high school gym. Rows of CS pushed cot to cot, lines stretching out the bathrooms. Hundreds of people packing with phones held up trying to catch a signal. I pictured one person in that room who had been bitten an hour ago and didn't want to admit it, sweating under a Red Cross blanket, telling everyone they just felt a little tired. That was all it would take. A Petri dish with basketball hoops. Once they bolted those doors, you were in a box with strangers and no exit plan. The island didn't have lights or doctors or backup. It didn't have walls someone else had inspected or safety rules printed on laminated signs. But it had a ring of deep cold water and a cabin frame I had built myself, far enough from shore that nothing on 2 legs could reach it without showing itself the whole way. That seemed like a hell of a better bet than a folding cot in a crowded room. I turned the phone off, not just screen off, but powered down completely. I slid it into a kitchen drawer. If I kept it on, someone would call and ask for a ride or a favor, and the human part of me would try to say yes. The networks were choking anyway. No signal also meant no easy way for anyone to track where I went. I had let apps follow me for years, trading privacy for convenience. Tonight, I decided I was done feeding the machine. In the bedroom, I pulled up the corner of the rug in the closet and opened the small floor safe. 2 guns came out carrying more weight in my mind than they did in my hands. A bolt-action .308 rifle with a decent scope and 3 full boxes of soft-point rounds. About 60 shots if I made them count. Beside it, a .45 pistol with 3 loaded magazines and 2 extra boxes of hollow points I'd stashed years ago. Both had been cleaned and oiled after the last time I took them to the range. I checked the chambers, made sure the actions were smooth, then slipped them into padded cases with a small bottle of REM oil and a rag. Every drawer after that got the same ruthless question. Will this keep me alive out there? Duct tape went into a plastic tote, nylon rope, a headlamp, and a brick of batteries, a cheap pair of walkie-talkies I had bought for a fishing trip and never really used. Maybe useless, maybe a way to listen. A manual can opener, the old crank style. I threw that in because I had watched a neighbor try to open a can with a steak knife once when the power went out, slicing his hand open. And I had promised myself I would never be that unprepared. Civilization ends the moment you can't open your own food. When the tote was full, and I couldn't think of one more useful thing, I stopped looking. Loading the truck took 3 fast, sweaty passes. Duffel and tote into the bed, guns tucked behind the bench seat in the cab, fuel cans last. I tied everything down with a trucker's hitch I could undo in a hurry. Sirens carried over the trees from the highway and from town across the water, a constant background wail. Somewhere closer to the city, a helicopter beat the air, the thump, thump, thump of its rotors vibrating in my chest. None of those sounds pointed to any place I wanted to drive toward. The road from the house to the small cove where I kept the boat was 10 minutes on a normal day. That night, the drive felt fragile, like the asphalt itself might crack open. I drove with one eye on the rear view and one on the ditches. A minivan hurtled toward the highway, doing well over 80, crossing the center line. A sedan sat stalled half on the shoulder with its hazard lights ticking against the dark trees. No driver, no movement. That was enough warning for me. I didn't slow down. I pressed the gas and headed for the water. The lane to the cove dipped sharply toward the water, winding between the skeletal shapes of bare trees before ending abruptly at a strip of gravel and an old, weather-beaten dock. My aluminum boat sat on the rollers exactly where I had left it. Dull paint, patched seams bow pointed at the lake like a compass needle. I parked the truck close to the dock, killed the engine, and just listened for a moment. The silence was heavy. The only sound was the wind pushing small, choppy waves against the mudbank. No birds, no traffic, just the water. There was no point in sitting in the cab. I dropped the tailgate, the metal clanging too loud in the quiet, and hauled the fuel cans out, lining them up by the water's edge. I ran a hand along the boat's hull. It was dry and solid. It wasn't pretty. It had dents from years of work, but it floated, and right now, buoyancy was the only thing that mattered. The outboard went onto the transom with motions I had done 1,000 times in my sleep. Clamp, tighten, check the safety chain, connect the fuel line, squeeze the primer bulb until it goes hard. I slid the heavy duffel under the middle bench seat to keep the weight centered, stacked the food crates and toolboxes forward, and laid the rifle case carefully along the floorboards where it wouldn't get wet. The .45 stayed on my belt, heavy and reassuring. Before I launched, I backed the truck deep into the trees beside the lane, forcing it back until pine branches brushed against the doors and the bumper was buried in brush. I killed the dome light, locked it out of habit, and pocketed the keys. If I ever came back, it would still be there. If I didn't, well, someone would eventually score a free truck. At the dock, I pushed the boat down the guides. Aluminum scraped against wood until it eased into the water and floated free, bobbing slightly. Stepping off the dock always felt like a small risk, a shift in balance. Tonight, it felt like a line I wasn't going to cross twice. I untied the bow line, put one boot on the center seat, and shoved off hard with the other. I waited until I drifted 10 yards out before I pulled the cord. The old motor sputtered, coughed a cloud of blue smoke, and settled into a rough, familiar idle. I turned the bow toward a dark, shapeless mass on the far side of the lake. The island sat out from the main shore like a low hump of shadow, too small for a house and too awkward for a campground. Perfect. As soon as I cleared the protection of the cove, the air temperature dropped. It felt raw. I pulled my knit hat down over my ears and zipped my jacket to the chin. The lights from the houses on the main shore slid past in my peripheral vision, warm squares of yellow that signaled families, dinners, TV screens. I turned my back on them and watched them drop behind the curve of the land. The sirens dulled to a background hum. No other engines crossed the water. I was the only thing moving. Halfway across, I eased off the throttle to keep the noise down and scanned the dark for other boats. Nothing. The lake was a black mirror. I was heading the other way into the void. The island grew from a smudge into a real shape. On the front side, facing the town, it was just a wall of rock and tangled trees. But on the backside, a narrow cut opened into an inlet you couldn't see from open water unless you were right on top of it. I had found it years back while chasing a drifting marker buoy and had marked it on my paper chart with a star. I cut the motor 50 yards out and let the boat glide into the inlet on momentum. Silence rushed back in as the engine died. When the aluminum keel scraped against stone, I stepped into the shallows and dragged the bow up until the hull rested clear of the wash. The water was icy, seeping through the laces of my boots, but it was only ankle deep. I tied the bow line to a thick exposed root and stood there for a moment, breathing steam into the chill air, listening to the water lap against the aluminum. The cabin sat 20 widen from the landing up a short, steep rise between two massive pines, 12x16 FT, single room, galvanized metal roof, rough plank walls. There was a porch with 2 steps I had never gotten around to fixing and a steel chimney capping the stove corner. I had framed it one weekend at a time, hauling lumber from town board by board. Up close in the dark, it looked smaller than I remembered, vulnerable. The door was closed. The heavy padlock on the hasp sat exactly where I had left it 3 weeks ago. The dirt around the steps held old prints, fallen pine needles, and a dusting of frost. No new tracks, no broken branches. It was empty. I unlocked the padlock, the click sounding like a gunshot, and pushed inside. The air smelled of dry pine, dust, and cold iron. A narrow cot sat against the far wall. Simple shelves in the corner held a few rows of cans from past trips. Relics from a time when this was just a hobby. A table, 2 chairs, and a couple of unlit lanterns shared the space with the cast iron stove in the corner. Gray ash from the last fire, still sitting cold under the grate. Light discipline came first. Before I struck a match, I went to the windows. I swung the heavy wooden shutters down and slid the internal latches home. That stopped the wind, and it would hide the firelight from anyone watching on the shore. Only then did I turn to the heat. I dropped the duffel on the cot and went to the wood stacked behind the cabin. Split logs and kindling sat under a tarp, dry and ready. I carried an armload inside, crumpled old newspaper from a crate, and built a fire in the stove. One match later, the paper caught the orange glow flaring up, and then the kindling crackled. I closed the iron door and adjusted the damper. A few minutes later, the first real warmth began to radiate into the room, thawing my hands. While the fire took hold, I walked the room and checked the seams. No water stains on the ceiling, no daylight showing through the walls. But the weak spots were obvious. 2 windows on the long walls and a small one near the stove had always been for the morning view. Tonight, they were just holes in my armor. In the corner, I had a stack of spare lumber left over from the porch work. I grabbed my cordless drill from the tool bag. Thank God I'd charged the batteries last month, and a box of 3 index screws. I cut the boards to length with a handsaw, the rasping sound seeming too loud in the small room. Then I screwed 3 heavy planks across each window on the inside. I didn't use a hammer. The banging would have carried across the water like a dinner bell. The drill worried low and steady as the screws bit into the wood. The boards wouldn't stop a truck, but they would slow a body down and make a hell of a lot of noise if someone tried to come through. The door got the same treatment. The deadbolt still turned, but I wouldn't trust a $10 lock with my life. I set heavy steel brackets into the wall studs on either side of the frame, drove the screws in deep, and slid a thick 4x4 plank through to make a drop bar. With that in place, anyone trying the door would have to take the whole wall down to get in. By the time I set the plank, the stove was throwing real heat. The metal roof ticked as it warmed up. I sat on the edge of the cot and pulled off my wet boots and socks, setting them near the stove to dry. I pulled on thick wool socks from the duffel and flexed my toes until the pins and needles faded. My hands were shaking now, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline rush. The rush of moving, driving, and loading was gone, leaving just the silence of the island. I looked around the small room. Shadows danced on the walls from the stove vents. I started a mental list. Water, more food, better insulation, a designated corner for waste and washing so I don't pollute the site, ways to hear if something steps onto the island while I sleep. For tonight, the cabin was just a warm box with a locked door and a gun on the table. But starting tomorrow, it had to become a fortress. It had to become the machine that kept me alive. Morning broke gray and bitter. Light pushed through the thin gaps around the window boards and dusty slanting beams. For a split second, I woke up thinking I was back in my bedroom at the lake house, late for a shift, searching for the alarm clock. Then my eyes adjusted to the dim light, and I saw the heavy wooden bar dropped across the door and the cold iron stove in the corner. The memory hit me like a physical weight. I wasn't home. I had chosen the island over everything else, and the old world was gone. I threw off the sleeping bag, shivering as the cold air clamped down on me. I opened the stove door, fed 2 pieces of split oak onto the dying red coals, and watched until the flames licked up and took hold. Heat wasn't just comfort anymore. Heat was the only thing standing between me and freezing to death. Water was next on the list. 2 plastic jugs sat in the corner, leftovers from old weekend trips, but they wouldn't last long. The lake waited just down the slope, black and flat between the pine trunks. At this point, I trusted that lake water more than anything coming out of a city pipe, but I still wasn't about to drink it raw. One stomach bug out here could dehydrate me fast enough to kill me. I dug through a plastic bin under the shelf where I kept old camping gear buried under a tangle of nylon rope and a rolled-up rain jacket. I found a box of hand pump filters I had bought on sale 2 years ago and never opened. I took the filter and 2 empty jugs down to the inlet. The air had teeth this morning, biting at my exposed face. I stepped into the water up to my shins, the cold instantly penetrating my boots, and filled both jugs where the lake ran clean over the granite shelf. Back in the cabin, I set 1 jug on the table, dropped the intake hose into it, and started pumping into the second jug. The rhythm was steady. Swish clack, as clear water ran into clean plastic. It wasn't laboratory grade, but it was a solid layer between me and whatever bacteria lived in the untreated water. I put a pot of that filtered water on top of the stove and brought it to a rolling boil. Between the ceramic filter and the heat, it would have to be enough. Once water and fire were handled for the moment, the walls started to bother me. Bare pine boards with a thin layer of tar paper behind them had been fine for summer nights. They were not fine for late fall, and they sure as hell wouldn't hold up against a winter where no one was coming to plow roads or keep the power grid humming. The floor was the same story, cold pressing up through every gap between the planks. I didn't have rolls of pink fiberglass insulation stacked in a corner, but I did have resources. I pulled down thick moving blankets, an old heavy canvas tarp, and 2 thin rugs I had stored in the rafters. I went to work with a staple gun, tacking the blankets and tarp across the inside of the exterior walls, leaving a careful bare zone around the stove so nothing would catch fire. When I was done, it looked like I was living inside a padded cell lined with mismatched fabrics, but the drafts dropped right away. The rugs went down around the cot on the table, so my feet weren't resting straight on cold wood. Small fixes done with what I had, but the room held heat 10 times better after an hour of work. While I moved around with the staple gun, the small crank radio on the shelf spat static and fragments of a voice. Most stations were just dead air. The ones still alive were reading the same script on a loop. Stay indoors, go to listed shelters, avoid anyone acting confused or aggressive, report attacks, wait for further instructions. Out here, there were no listed shelters. There were no scrolling numbers at the bottom of the TV screen. There was no patrol car to call if something started banging on the door. That realization was terrifying and simple at the same time. No one was coming. Anything that changed about my situation would be because I changed it. By midday, I had a rough survival list burned into my head. Heat, water, food, and waste. Heat came from the stove as long as I kept swinging the axe. Water came from the lake, filtered and boiled. Food was in cans and bags for now, but there was a hard limit printed on every label. Waste meant I had to stop pretending this was just an extended fishing trip. In the summer, I used to dig a shallow hole in the trees and call it good. That might work for a weekend. It wouldn't work for months with a person living in a space this small. Sanitation kills you just as dead as a bullet if you get it wrong. Behind the cabin, the ground dropped off toward a patch of thick brush. I picked a dry spot there, framed a small square with scrap 2x4s, and set a heavy plastic crate with the bottom cut out over the middle. A toilet seat I had once brought out here as a gag gift for a buddy finally earned its place on top of that crate. I dug a deep pit under it, lined the upper edge with flat stone so the sandy soil wouldn't cave in, and set a simple plywood lid over the seat to keep bugs and smells down. A 5-gallon bucket beside it held a mix of dirt and old wood shavings from past projects with a small plastic scoop on top. Do your business, cover it with dirt, and close the lid. It was crude, but it kept the waste in one place and away from the cabin and the water source. Back inside, I laid every bit of food I had on the table and took inventory. Cans of beans, soup, mixed vegetables, stewed tomatoes and tuna, bags of white rice and pasta, 2 jars of peanut butter, coffee, salt, sugar, and that cheap bottle of multivitamins. Spread out like that, it looked like a feast. Then I started doing the math, dividing it by days, and the pile shrank in my mind. I set simple rules immediately. 2 real meals a day. No eating just because I was anxious or bored. Anything with real protein, tuna, spam, beans was a bonus, not something to burn through without thinking. Once I could fish without drawing eyes from every shore, the lake would help feed me. Until then, every can and every cup of rice had to count. None of that meant much if the infection reached me. I needed to know who and what was moving around the lake perimeter. By mid-afternoon, with the stove holding steady and the cabin actually feeling warm, I grabbed a small pair of binoculars and climbed the tallest pine near the inlet. The bark was rough and cold under my hands, scraping my knuckles. Halfway up, I found a fork in the branches with a clear view through the needles. From there, I could scope the public launch on one side, a line of expensive docks on the shore, and a strip of sand where a side road touched the far bank. The town looked wrong. Even from this distance, it looked hollowed out. Only one thin thread of smoke rose from a single chimney in a neighborhood of 50 houses. No one walked the docks. No fishing boats cut white-wake lines across the water. The highway noise, usually a constant hum, was thin now, just a few desperate engines revving out there in the silence. It was the quiet that scared me the most. On the third morning, the lake lay flat and dull, a gray sheet of hammered iron with a thin layer of mist drifting over the surface. Heavy frost coated the porch rail, and the air felt like broken glass in my throat when I stepped outside to check the perimeter. I fed the stove to keep the coals alive, drank a mug of hot water mixed with instant coffee, and then took the rifle and the binoculars to climb the pine again. Guessing what was happening on the shore had been fine for the first 2 days, but from now on, I needed to see it with my own eyes. From the fork in the branches, I had a commanding view of the public launch, the row of silent houses, and a bare strip of rocky bank on the east side. The launch was still chained and empty. Most houses showed no smoke, looking like dead teeth in a jaw. Nothing moved for an hour until a single figure came into view along the east bank, walking precariously on the slick rocks just above the drop-off into deeper water. At first, I thought it was another dead one, a straggler, but the steps were too careful, and the head kept snapping back to check the trail behind. I brought the glass up and focused. It was a woman, small frame, wearing a dark jacket and a pack with straps pulled tight across her chest. Her hair was tied back and she was moving with desperate purpose. Behind her, maybe 30 yards up the slope where the woods met the shore, 3 shufflers walked in a loose, staggering line. They didn't run, but they didn't wander aimlessly either. They had a scent or a sightline. Every time she slowed to navigate a wet rock or stumbled on driftwood, they ate a little more of the distance. There was no one else on that stretch of shore to help her. If she tripped and stayed down for more than 10 seconds, they would be on top of her. For a few heartbeats, I sat there with the rifle across my lap and told myself this wasn't my problem. My rules were simple. No contact meant no new variables, no risk of infection inside the cabin. But then she slipped on a patch of loose shale, dropped hard to one knee, and had to scramble with both hands to get back up. That was enough. I cursed under my breath, climbed down fast, grabbed the small marine air horn off the shelf in case I needed a loud diversion, stuffed it in my jacket pocket, and ran for the inlet. I grabbed the paddle and worked the boat silently toward a short point of stone that stuck a few yards out into the lake. Beyond it, the bottom dropped off fast into deep water. If she could reach that point and jump, she would be in water too deep for them to stand. But she'd freeze if I didn't pull her out fast. I stood up in the boat just enough to show my silhouette against the sky and waved an arm. When she glanced my way, eyes wide with panic, I put my voice out across the water, low but hard, and said, "Down here by the rocks. Come straight to me and get into the water. Don't stop fighting with them on the bank." She didn't hesitate. She hit the last row of stones in a clumsy, desperate half jump, arms wide for balance, boots skidding on moss. She dropped to one knee in the shallows, grabbed the gunwale of the boat, and my hand closed around her forearm. The weight nearly pulled me off balance, but the aluminum hull took the brunt of it, and she tumbled into the boat in a wet heap, pack and all. I shoved off hard with the paddle, putting 10 ft of dark water between us and the rocks before I even touched the motor. The woman sat up, coughing and dragging the heavy pack straighter, her breath loud and ragged in the cold air. I kept my eyes locked on the bank and said, "I need to know right now any bites, deep scratches, anything that broke the skin in the last 24 hours. She shook her head violently, still catching her breath, and answered, "No bite, no scratch, just blisters and a long walk. I've been moving since before sunrise to get away from the highway." When 20 yards of safety sat between us and the shore, I pulled the starter cord and brought the motor back to life at low speed. She watched the 3 shufflers reach the water's edge. They paced the rocks, staring at us with dead, milky eyes, but they wouldn't enter the deep water. She looked at them, then turned to me and asked, "You live out here, or are we both doing the same dumb thing on the same morning?" I kept one hand on the tiller, steering us toward the hidden inlet, and said, "I built a cabin on rock nobody else wanted. Right now, that's the safest bad idea I've got. Name's Tate Winslow. You," she pushed wet, matted hair off her face and said, "Nora Vance. I test lake water and tap samples when the lab's open and the world's pretending everything's fine. The city went sideways 2 days ago. I took back roads up here because I thought the lake might be quiet." It was until those 3 came out of a backyard and locked onto me. I nodded, keeping the boat steady, and said, "Quiet doesn't mean empty anymore. Look, as long as you stay honest about bites and blood, you're welcome by the fire. You lie to me, we're both finished." She held my eyes for a second. She looked exhausted, scared, but sharp, and then looked back at the shrinking shoreline and said, "No lies. I'm not dragging this infection into the only dry room I've seen since I ditched my car." We slipped back into the inlet, and the trees and rock around the island cut us off from the rest of the lake, wrapping us in silence again. I tied the bowline, helped her onto the small strip of shore, and led the way up the rise. The cabin sat there with its boarded windows and a thin, reassuring line of smoke drifting from the chimney. It still looked like something I had built for weekends, a rough shack, but now it had 4 solid walls and a bar on the door. Inside, I dropped the heavy wooden bar back into its slots and pointed at the cot. "Pack off wet layers off, feet by the stove," I said, then opened the iron door and fed the fire dry wood until it roared. She shrugged out of the pack, peeled off her soaked jacket and outer shirt, and sat so close to the heat that steam started to rise from her damp sleeves. Up close, her face showed exactly how far she had pushed it. Dark circles under her eyes, lips a little blue from the water and the wind chill. She looked like she was vibrating with residual adrenaline. That afternoon, we didn't rest. We worked. We dragged spare boards in from the pile behind the cabin and cut a second layer for each window, screwing them in from the inside with just a thin horizontal slit left at eye height and one of them for observation. Nora followed behind me with strips of old wool blanket, tacking them over every gap where daylight showed. I pulled the door bar down, cut deeper pockets into the frame studs with a chisel, and set heavy metal brackets so it couldn't jump free if someone or something hit the door hard from the outside. We moved the small table away from the front wall and built a low brace out of scrap lumber across the room that could hold a rifle steady without wobble. By dark, the cabin felt different. It held heat better. The door felt solid as a bank vault when I leaned my weight into it, and the windows looked more like real barricades than an afterthought. 2 mugs of hot water sat on the table, 2 pairs of boots steamed by the stove, and the list in my head shifted from surviving tonight to making this hold through the first snow. Nora watched the fire for a long time, the light dancing on her face, and finally looked up and said, "If nobody else knows this place is here, we might actually have a shot at writing this out." I answered, "That's the plan. If the island stays a blank spot on everyone's map, it stays ours." With Nora on the island, the daily grind shifted from a scramble into a disciplined routine. She walked the cabin with a black marker, hunting down every draft like it was a personal enemy, marking the gaps and telling me we would regret each one when the real Canadian cold rolled down. I cut and stacked wood until my shoulders burned, tightened the door bar, and kept the stove running low to conserve fuel. We split the day into hard shifts. One of us climbed the pine with binoculars to freeze in the wind, while the other handled water, food inventory, and small repairs. Nora was better at watching. She had a scientist's patience. She could track the highway, the silent docks, and the empty houses, then sit down and tell me exactly how many bodies had moved and how many chimneys still smoked. Most days she just wrote "no change" in a small spiral notebook and underlined it twice. Sometimes she added a short note about a trail of shufflers or a collar that had settled near a parking lot, screaming its broken noise until it pulled others in. Once we both watched a ripper sprint down a side street, hit a stalled car hard enough to rock it on its springs, vanish from sight, and then climb back up to keep running. The flat, heavy stamp of its feet carried over the water, staying in our heads as a sound we would never ignore. About a week after she arrived, the lake carried something new. Near mid-afternoon, the wind shifted and brought faint shouts from the direction of the old marina on the far shore. A few seconds later, a scream cut across the water and didn't stop cleaning. It gurgled out. We grabbed the rifle and binoculars, ran down to the inlet, and climbed to the low rock that gave us a clear firing line. The marina was a strip of rotting slips and a few big fiberglass hulls that nobody was paying for anymore. Now, a thin line of black smoke rose from the main dock. Through the glass, I saw one man on his feet, one body down and unmoving, and 3 dead ones closing in. The standing man shoved a small john boat off the dock, tried to jump in, missed his step on the slick wood, and went straight into the freezing water. The boat rolled, dumped whatever gear was inside, and drifted away while he caught the overturned hull with both arms kicking hard, but barely moving. On the dock, the 3 dead reached the edge and stopped. 2 moved like shufflers, slow and crooked. The third shifted its weight like a sprinter stuck behind a starting line, head snapping at every splash. A ripper. The only thing holding it back was the deep drop off the end of the boards. We watched for a slow count of 10. The man in the water wasn't sinking yet, but the cold and the panic were going to take him long before he could swim a mile. Nora kept her eyes glued to the dock and said, "If we leave him, he freezes right there or he climbs back up and they tear him apart." I checked the perimeter of the marina for more movement and answered, "If we go out, Anyone alive on that shore sees exactly where we came from. We can't haul every stranger into the boat, Nora. She let that sit for a second, kept looking through the glass and said, right now, it is one man and 3 dead things on rotten planks, and none of them can swim. You have the motor, I can work a rope, and if it goes sideways, we cut the line and come home. I want somebody to do that math for me if I was the one in the water. She wasn't pushing for drama. She hadn't argued when I set the hard rules about food, water, and bite checks. She asked because she had weighed the risk and still saw a line that made sense. I nodded and said, we go fast, no stepping onto the dock. No shooting unless we have no choice. We pull him over the side and bring him here. If he's bitten or lying, he goes back in before we hit shallow water. Nora racked the bolt on her carbine and said, fair enough. We grabbed the rifle, 2 coils of heavy rope, and the small air horn, then pushed the boat off the rocks and let it drift into the channel before she started the motor. Nora brought the speed up just enough to eat the distance without throwing a long trail of engine noise that would echo off the hills. The man in the water saw us coming and started yelling, wasting energy. So I waved an arm and shouted, save your breath and keep your arms on that hull. We aren't fishing you out twice. As we came close, the 3 on the dock turned to face us. The shufflers shuffled to the edge, reaching out with slow, gray hands. The Ripper paced 3 short steps and 3 back, feet hammering the planks in a hard, flat rhythm. It leaned forward like it might force itself to drop, then pulled back again, stuck between hunger and the line where the wood ended. We closed in, the boat rocking in the chop. I kept the rifle trained on the Ripper while Nora killed the throttle and threw a line. It landed across the man's shoulder, but his hands were too frozen to grip it. He was blue-lipped, shivering so hard the water rippled around him. He yelled, the case, grab the case. I looked and saw a black waterproof hard case floating next to him, tethered to his belt by a nylon strap. I shouted, forget the gear, grab the rope. But he screamed back, it's the guns, the ammo, take it. Nora didn't argue. She leaned over the gunwale, risking her balance, and snagged the strap of the case, hauling it over the side with a heavy thud. Then she grabbed the back of the man's jacket. I slung the rifle and moved to help her. On 3, I grunted. 1, 2, 3. We heaved and he tumbled into the aluminum hull, coughing up water, shaking uncontrollably. On the dock, the Ripper let out a shriek that sounded like tearing metal and crouched as if to jump. I grabbed the tiller and gunned the engine. The boat surged away, leaving the marina and the monsters in our wake. On the ride back, the man lay in the bottom of the boat, hugging the hard case like a child. I shouted over the motor, check him, Nora. She scanned his hands and neck from a safe distance. No bites visible, she yelled back. I looked at the stranger and said, I'm Tate, that's Nora, you bring any surprises in that box. He looked up, teeth chattering, and tapped the black case. Rat, he stammered. And yeah, a Mossberg shotgun and 3 boxes of shells. I wasn't leaving them for the dead. That was the moment I knew he'd fit in. He was half frozen, nearly drowned, but he'd saved the ammo. Smoke on the north shore was the first sign that the lake wasn't just ours anymore. At first, it was just one thin gray line rising from the picnic area above a shallow bay where families used to grill burgers in July. I watched it from the pine and told myself it might be one straggling family burning the last of their charcoal. But the smoke came back the next day, and the next thicker and darker. Trucks began to cluster along the access road, nose to tail, forming a jagged wall of metal instead of sitting scattered and empty like before. Through the glass, I started counting bodies around that fire. 4 at first, then more each day, moving between blue tarps and picnic tables they had dragged into a rough defensive ring. Every morning, a scavenger crew left the loop with empty packs. Every afternoon, they came back hauling blankets, red fuel cans, and cardboard boxes. More of the parked cars sat with doors hanging open and glass smashed out. Nora watched them write in her notebook and said, they aren't waiting for help anymore. They're stripping the carcass. They're taking anything that keeps them standing for one more day. We started calling them the shore camp. On paper, they were doing exactly what we were doing, just with more people and a lot more noise, but the difference was simple geometry. We had 4 tight, insulated walls on a rock nobody had cared about. They had numbers, big wasteful fires, and shelves they were chewing through in plain sight of our side of the lake. If they stayed busy scavenging on land, the water and distance still worked for us. But logic said that once they ran out of easy ground, we were next on the menu. For a while, they didn't look our way. We tried to stay invisible. We burned only kiln-dried wood and kept the stove damper choked down so the smoke stayed thin. The generator ran only in short bursts during storms. The boat stayed pulled high in the inlet under a camouflage tarp. We stopped going to shore unless it was critical. Tracks on the strip of bank got raked out after every trip. The plan was to look like one more dead patch of trees, but looking back, I knew we were kidding ourselves. You can't cheat physics in sub-zero temperatures. Even dry wood throws a heat ripple against a gray sky, and eventually someone with a scope and time on their hands was going to spot the anomaly. When the sound of their chainsaws finally faded, I told the others we had dodged that pass only because they were tired and guessing. Rhett sat by the door, oiling the action of the Mossberg shotgun he'd brought with him, and watched the distant fire light. He shook his head and said, "They've hit every cabin they can walk to. Next is fuel and motors. After that, they look across the water and ask why one clump of trees never lights up at all." Hunger makes people really curious. The camp kept growing like a tumor. By the second week, at least a dozen people moved around that loop. They stacked wooden pallets as a windbreak and kept a barrel stove burning at the center, feeding it furniture. A man with a scoped deer rifle walked the edge of the parking lot near dusk, walking a perimeter. At night, their fire glowed orange through the trunks, and we heard short, angry arguments and single gunshots. We couldn't hear the words, but the rhythm was clear. Food and wood were already turning into reasons to kill each other. The first clear sign they had noticed more than empty docks came on a bitter cold morning, with thin ice crusting the shallows. From the pine, I saw two of them at the end of their dock with rifles. They weren't watching the road or the woods. They were staring straight across the open water. One pointed a gloved hand along a line that would pass near our rock. The other nodded slowly, like he had just agreed to something he didn't want to do but couldn't avoid much longer. That afternoon, their skiff came out again, this time on a straight intercept line instead of hugging the bank. 3 people sat in it, bundled in mismatched heavy coats. The motor ran low and steady. We were in place when the sound reached the inlet. Nora took the binoculars at the narrow slit in the window boards. I set the rifle on its rest. Rhett sat just inside the door, the shotgun resting across his knees, a handful of shells on the floor beside him. The skiff slowed about 200 wide off the island, rocking in the chop, and the man in the bow raised his voice and shouted, "Cabin on the rock, we see your smoke. We're not here to start trouble." "We want to talk." He knew we were watching. There was no point in hiding now. I stayed behind the boards, invisible in the shadow, and shouted back, "You've got your camp on shore, that's your ground. This is ours." He looked back at the others in the boat, then toward the cabin again, and answered, "Our ground is tents in the wind and shelves that get lighter every day. Yours is 4 walls, a roof, and a stash. We're not asking for a blessing, we're asking for a share." They had burned through what they could reach, and now they were looking at us not just as neighbors, but as a warehouse. I kept my voice level, trying not to give away how tight my grip was on the rifle stock. 3 people live here. I said we planned for 3, not for a refugee camp. If we open this place up, we all run out together. That kills us and it doesn't save you. The man in the bow shifted like he wanted to come closer, but didn't like the silence coming from our windows. He yelled, "You could come to us. Bring your gear. Fold in more hands, more guns. Right now you're 3 people in a wooden box. 1 bad night, 1 breach, and you're gone." He believed that line. I believed in the freezing water and the reinforced boards between us and his camp. We chose this rock because it's hard to reach. I said, "That's the only reason we're still breathing. I'm not walking into a ring of strangers where one lie about a fever or a bite gets us all killed. You keep your side, we keep ours." For a few seconds, only the slap of water against their hull made any sound, and then he tried once more, his voice harder this time. "Do the math," he shouted. "Think about what happens when the wood and food on this shore really run out. We're not going to lie down on the bank and quit. We're going to look at the one dry roof on this lake and decide what matters more, your claim or our lives." He had just told us exactly who they were going to be when hunger pressed hard enough. I didn't dress it up. "Then this is where we stay," I said. "If you come back here again, it won't be to talk." The man stared at the trees for a long moment, calculating the odds, then tapped the driver's shoulder. The motor winded as it came up in pitch. The skiff turned and headed back toward the north shore. The wake spread in a thin, expanding line across the gray water and reached our rocks a minute later. It was a small thing, just another wave slapping the bank, but it meant the quiet part of the island's life was over, and we all knew the war had just started. The boats came for us on a clear, hard night when the wind had finally dropped, leaving the air so still that sound carried across the whole lake like it was traveling over glass. For 3 evenings, we had watched the black smoke rise from the shore camp and seen their trucks come and go on the access road, desperate and erratic. Nobody over there was packing up to leave. We knew the math. We added 1 more row of reinforced boards to the windows, checked the heavy door bar twice, and set the guns and spare magazines within arm's reach on the table. We agreed on one absolute rule. Once the motors started, nobody opened that door for anything less than fire. Thin ice had started to form in the sheltered cove's concentric white rings that cracked under the first wave of the morning. But out in the main channel, the water stayed open and black. Every morning I climbed the pine to make sure the gap was still there. It never froze between us and the north bank. If anyone wanted our cabin, they had to come on a boat and they had to show themselves in open water with nowhere to hide. The sound reached us just after full dark. The whine of one small outboard motor running low and another falling in behind it out of the sink. I went to the viewing slit, set the rifle on its padded rest, and killed the lantern with my free hand, plunging us into darkness. Nora knelt by the sidewall with her carbine ready, the barrel resting on a loop of strap. The entire chamber, the bones, the sarcophagus, even the walls and floor, was coated in a thick layer of bright red cinnabar dust. The red pigment clung to everything, staining the scene like frozen fire. That is why she became known as the Red Queen. But who was she? Why was she buried with such splendor? And why in red? The tomb revealed treasures alongside her remains. Jade beads, pearl ornaments, seashells, bone needles, and delicate pieces of jewelry that once adorned her body. Her teeth had jade inlays, a sign of high nobility. Two young individuals thought to be attendants or sacrifices were also buried near her, a somber reminder of Maya rituals of death. The richness of the burial suggested she was no ordinary woman. She was someone of immense importance. For years, archaeologists debated her identity. Some believed she was Pakal's wife, Lady Takbu Aja, the queen consort of Palni. Others argued she might have been his mother, Lady Zakuk, who played a key role in securing Pakal's throne. Whoever she was, her presence in Temple 13 meant she belonged to the royal bloodline, perhaps even a matriarch who shaped the destiny of Palni. The cinnabar, that deep, dangerous red mineral made of mercury sulfide, was more than decoration. To the Maya, red was the color of blood, of life, of death, of rebirth. Covering the queen in red was a ritual act, a way of surrounding her with the essence of eternal life. Yet cinnabar is also toxic. Those who prepared her body, those who laid the powder across her bones, may have poisoned themselves in the process. It was as if the very pigment was both a blessing and a curse, sealing her body in beauty while carrying death for the living. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine stepping into that tomb. The flicker of your torchlight dances across crimson walls. The skeleton before you glows red as though still alive, still breathing. Jewels catch the light, jade glimmers green against the fiery dust, and you realize you are not simply looking at bones. You are looking at a mystery, a story frozen in red. The Red Queen's tomb is often compared to that of Pallas the Great, discovered just decades earlier. Pakal's sarcophagus is monumental with his lid, famously carved to show him descending into the underworld or perhaps ascending to the heavens. But while Pakal's tomb tells the story of a king, the Red Queen speaks of silence. She left no inscriptions, no hieroglyphs, no clear identity, only her presence, her jewels, and her blood-red cocoon. In a way, her mystery is more powerful than Pakal's certainty. We know Pakal's name, his lineage, his deeds, but the Red Queen remains beyond reach like a whisper half heard in the jungle night. Her silence invites imagination. Her enigma stirs curiosity. Was she the queen who guided Pank through its golden age? Was she the woman who ensured Pakal's reign? Or was she someone else entirely, a forgotten ruler, erased from memory? Modern science has tried to answer the question. Studies of her DNA suggest she was not Pakal's mother, but may have been his wife. Yet nothing is certain. The jungle keeps her secret. The walls of the temple refuse to speak, and so she lies there as she has for centuries, a puzzle wrapped in red. There is something almost poetic about her resting place. Penang itself is unlike other Maya cities. Its architecture is refined, its art delicate, its inscriptions rich with history. It feels less like a fortress and more like a palace of thought, a place of poetry and philosophy. To find the Red Queen, there is to feel the balance of strength and grace, of kings and queens, of life and death. The Red Queen's tomb is not only about who she was, it is about what she represents. She embodies the Maya view of death as transformation. She embodies the mysteries still locked beneath the soil, the secrets of a civilization both brilliant and fragile. And above all, she embodies the truth that sometimes history remembers names, and sometimes it remembers only colors, only symbols. When you think of Palni, you think of temples rising above the jungle canopy, mist curling around stone steps, parrots calling in the distance. But deep below in the heart of stone, the Red Queen still lies, cloaked in cinnabar, a reminder that even in silence, even in mystery, the past still breathes. And so the Red Queen waits, not for answers, perhaps not for her name to be restored, but for us to stand in awe, to wonder, and to realize that some stories are not meant to be solved, only felt. The Copper Serpent of Timna. In the blazing desert of southern Israel, in a place where the sun burns the earth into shades of gold and red, lies a valley unlike any other. It is called Timna, a land of jagged cliffs, towering sandstone pillars, and shadows that stretch long across the sand at dusk. For thousands of years, this valley has been a place of mystery. A place where humans came not just to survive, but to worship, to dig, to smelt, and to leave behind fragments of stories that still echo today. It is here in the heart of Timna that archaeologists uncovered one of the most enigmatic relics of the ancient world, the Copper Serpent. The Valley of Timna has long been known for its copper mines, some of the oldest in the world. They were already being worked over 3,000 years ago at the time when ancient Egypt extended its hand into Canaan. The desert air still carries the scent of burnt charcoal, and the stones are blackened with the memory of countless smelting fires. To imagine Timna in its prime is to see workers hammering, hauling, smelting, the glow of furnaces lighting up the night, smoke spiraling into the stars. And yet, amid the sweat and labor, amid the clamor of tools and fire, there was something more. There was belief, there was ritual, there was worship. For in this place, people did not see copper as just a metal. They saw it as a gift from the gods, pulled from the bones of the earth, a sacred treasure that needed offerings, prayers, and symbols. The most striking of those symbols was discovered in a temple at the base of Timna's sandstone cliffs, a temple dedicated to a serpent. Archaeologists brushing sand away stone by stone found altars, carvings, and then almost unbelievably, a small copper serpent coiled and shining, crafted by human hands more than 3,000 years ago. The serpent is simple yet powerful. Twisted into a spiral, its body gleams with the reddish hue of copper, a metal that would have glowed fiercely in the desert sun. But this was not just decoration. To those who placed it in the temple, it was a sacred object, a symbol of divinity, of healing, of death and rebirth. The serpent as a figure is as old as human belief itself. Across cultures, across continents, it appears again and again. In Egypt, it was the cobra, symbol of protection and royalty. In Mesopotamia, it was linked to gods of wisdom and fertility. In the Hebrew Bible, we hear of Moses lifting a bronze serpent on a pole so that the afflicted could be healed simply by looking upon it. And here in Timna, in the burning silence of the desert, we find yet another echo of that ancient image, a copper serpent waiting for the faithful. Imagine the scene for a moment. The valley at dusk, the sandstone cliffs glowing red as the sun dips low, the air still heavy with the smell of smelting. A group of worshippers gather before a small altar. On it rests the copper serpent, gleaming with the last rays of light. Prayers are whispered. Offerings of food, of incense, perhaps of animal sacrifice, are laid before the figure. And in the shadows, the serpent becomes more than copper. It becomes alive. It becomes the mediator between human and divine. But what was this serpent meant to represent? Was it a local deity of the desert tribes who worked these mines? Was it an imported symbol brought here by Egyptian overseers or Canaanite craftsmen? Or was it something older still, a memory of beliefs carried through centuries of migration and survival? The temple at Timna has revealed clues but not answers. We know that Egyptians once controlled these mines. We know that Midianites, the desert tribes, later took over and left offerings of their own. And we know that serpents appear in their mythology too. Some scholars believe the copper serpent was linked to the Midianite god. Perhaps even the same serpent is later remembered in the biblical tale of Moses and the bronze serpent in the wilderness. Could the Timna serpent be a physical echo of that very story? The mystery deepens when we consider its material. Copper itself was sacred. It was pulled from the mountains with immense effort, smelted with knowledge that was almost alchemical. To turn stone into metal was to perform magic, and to then shape that metal into the form of a serpent. A creature feared, revered, and mysterious was to create something that straddled the line between earth and spirit. The serpent's presence in Timna also reminds us of the desert itself, harsh, unforgiving, and yet strangely eternal. For the desert is a place of survival, of confrontation with the self, of visions. Those who lived here would have seen snakes often slithering across the sand, striking suddenly, carrying venom and death, yet also shedding their skins, appearing reborn. It is no wonder they chose the serpent as their sacred sign. It embodied both danger and renewal, death and life. Today, the copper serpent of Timna rests not in the desert, but in a museum carefully preserved. Yet the temple where it was found still stands in the valley, its stones silent under the burning sun. Visitors who walk there can almost feel the presence of those who came before. Miners, priests, wanderers, all drawn to this place where copper, serpent, and desert met in a strange and sacred harmony. The Red Queen of Palin, whose bones were covered in cinnabar, reminded us of life and death in crimson. The copper serpent of Timna, twisted and shining, reminds us of survival in bronze. Two colors, two symbols, two echoes of humanity's endless attempt to make sense of the world. Close your eyes for a moment. Picture that small serpent glowing in the firelight held in the hand of a priest in the desert night. Picture the stars wheeling above the sandstone cliffs as chants rises into the air. Picture the miners exhausted and broken offering a prayer to the serpent before returning to their work. And realize for them it was never just a piece of copper. It was protection. It was healing. It was hope. The copper serpent of Timna is more than an artifact. It is a symbol of how deeply belief runs through human history. We may not know exactly what it meant to those who made it, but we feel it still. We feel the weight of mystery. We feel the rhythm of ancient lives. And we feel the quiet truth that even in the harshest places, humans always carried their gods with them. Even if those gods took the form of a serpent made of copper, the forgotten temples of Gunung deep in the lush valleys of Bali, where the sound of flowing water mixes with the songs of birds, and the air carries the heavy perfume of tropical flowers, there lies a place of stone and silence, a place where human hands carve the very face of a mountain into a sacred memory. This place is Gunawi, the forgotten temples cut into the cliffs, standing as eternal guardians of Bali's ancient past. The journey to Gunung begins with a descent. Stone steps lead down through rice terraces, each field glowing green under the sun, the stalk swaying gently in the breeze. The path narrows, winding through the forest until the sound of water becomes stronger. At the bottom, a river flows, the Pecker, sacred to the Balines, believed to hold spiritual power. And there, carved into the cliffs on either side, rise the monuments of Gunung 10 giant shrines stand in silence, each one cut directly into the stone walls of the valley. They are called Kandi, memorials to kings and queens of a dynasty long gone. Each shrine towers more than 7 m high, its surface etched with careful detail, as if the cliff itself had been turned into a temple by invisible hands. Time has worn their edges. Moss clings to the stone and vines snake across the carvings, yet they remain solemn, eternal, as if waiting for someone to remember their story. Who built Gunung The stones whisper of Bali's ancient kings of the Warmadua dynasty in the 11th century. Tradition says the shrines were dedicated to King Anak Wungu and his royal family. One side of the river, it is said, holds monuments for the king's consorts, the other for the king himself and his sons. But whether these tales are true or legendary, the stone does not tell us. It only holds the silence of centuries. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of chisels striking rock. Imagine hundreds of workers slowly carving these vast monuments into the cliff, stroke by stroke, as priests chanted prayers nearby, as incense curled into the air as the jungle pressed close on all sides. The work would have taken years, perhaps decades, and when it was finished, the cliffs themselves had become a temple, a place where stone, water, and sky met in harmony. The river below was not chosen by chance. In Bali, water is sacred. It is the source of life, the spirit that flows through all things. The Pakraisan River was believed to be holy, and building a temple beside it was a way of tying the royal family to the eternal flow of nature. In this way, the monuments of Gunung were not just memorials of stone. They were prayers carved into the earth, binding human life to the sacred rhythm of the land. Standing before the shrines, one cannot help but feel small. The cliffs rise high, the carvings loom above, and the air is thick with stillness. The jungle seems to hold its breath. It is as if the valley itself remembers the footsteps of those who once came here. Kings, priests, worshippers, mourners. Their voices are gone, but their presence lingers, carved into every groove of the stone. What makes Gunung haunting is not only its beauty, but its mystery. Unlike the towering temples of Angkor or the pyramids of Egypt, this site feels hidden, intimate, tucked away in the folds of the earth. It is not a city of stone, but a whisper of one, a place less concerned with power and more with remembrance. Some legends tell of giants carving the cliffs in a single night. Others say the shrines were made by the mighty warrior Kubota, who shaped the stone with his bare hands. Myth and history blur here, as they so often do in places where the past has been half forgotten. But whether by giant or king, warrior or mason, the result is the same, a place of awe. As you walk through Gunung the sound of the river never leaves you. Its steady flow is like a heartbeat echoing against the stone. The air smells of damp earth and moss. Small offerings of flowers and rice left by modern Balinese devotees rest at the base of the shrines. A reminder that even now, 1,000 years later, the site is not abandoned. It is still alive. The carvings themselves, though weathered, still hold their form. Tall tiered structures imitating the wooden architecture of temples, yet carved out of solid rock. They mimic the form of buildings that no longer survive, preserving in stone what might have once stood in wood. It is like a shadow of a city, a memory pressed into the earth. Why did the kings of Bali choose this place? Perhaps because of the river's sacred power. Perhaps because the valley enclosed by cliffs and jungle felt like a womb of the earth, a place where the living could commune with the spirits of the dead. Or perhaps because in carving their memorials into the rock, they believed they were ensuring eternity. Wood burns, stone erodes slowly, but a cliff can last forever, yet even stone is not immune to time. Rain has worn grooves into the shrines. Moss and lichens slowly cover their surfaces. The jungle presses ever closer, reclaiming what was once carved away. And yet this too adds to the magic of Gunung for here the boundary between nature and temple is thin. The carvings are part of the cliff is part of the jungle, and the jungle is alive. It is as if the entire valley is one great temple built not just by human hands, but by earth itself. Standing there, you begin to wonder, what did the people of Bali see in these shrines? Were they monuments to ancestors, places to honor the dead? Were they meant as eternal homes for the spirits of kings, carved into the stone so that their power would never fade? Or were they meant as messages to the gods, declarations in rock that the royal line was bound to the earth, the river, and the heavens? We may never know the full truth, but we feel it. We feel it in the quiet rhythm of the water, in the towering presence of the stone, in the way the valley wraps around you like an embrace. Ganonkawi is not just a site of history. It is a place of memory, of reverence, of mystery. Today, travelers come from around the world to walk those same steps down the valley, to stand before the shrines, to leave flowers at their feet. They take photographs, whisper prayers, listen to the river, and though the kings are gone, the shrines still fulfill their purpose. They remind us of the fleeting nature of life and the enduring nature of stone. So close your eyes, hear the river flowing, feel the damp air of the jungle. Imagine the flicker of oil lamps against the cliff at night, the sound of priests chanting. The sight of kings and queens being honored in silence. Imagine the valley not as it is now, but as it was, alive with devotion, alive with memory. The forgotten temples of Ganawi may never reveal all their secrets, but they do not need to, for in their silence they give us something deeper. They give us wonder, they give us stillness. They give us the reminder that long before us, others stood here too, asking the same questions, seeking the same peace, carving their prayers into stone. And in the rhythm of the river, we realize their voices are still here, soft, eternal, flowing with the water, the golden rhinos of Mapungu. In the far northern reaches of South Africa, where the Limpopo River winds through dry plains and baobab trees stretch their limbs against the sky, there is a hill that once held a kingdom forgotten for centuries, buried beneath earth in silence. It was here on Mapungubu Hill that archaeologists uncovered a treasure that would change our understanding of Africa's past. Among beads, pottery, and fragments of gold, one artifact stood out above the rest, a small, delicate figure shaped like a rhinoceros, the golden rhino of Mapungubu. At first glance, it is a simple object, barely 20 cm long, fragile and light. Its body is made of carved wood, covered carefully with sheets of hammered gold, stitched together with tiny nails. Yet in its simplicity lies its power. For this golden rhino, unearthed after centuries of silence, carried the weight of a kingdom story. The year was 1932 when the first golden rhino was found. The archaeologists who dug at Mapungubu could not have imagined what they were about to uncover. Until then, much of the world thought that Africa south of the Sahara had been a land without great civilizations, without art, without gold. But Mapungubu told a different story. Here was evidence of a society wealthy, powerful, and connected to trade routes that stretched across continents. The golden rhino was not the only treasure found. There were golden scepters, beads, ornaments. There were graves on the summit of the hill filled with artifacts that spoke of kings and queens. But it was the rhino that captured the imagination. Why a rhino? Why was this animal chosen to be immortalized in gold? In African tradition, the rhino is a symbol of strength, of resilience, of untamed spirit. It moves with power, yet it lives quietly, grazing, roaming, avoiding conflict until threatened. For the people of Mapungu, the rhino may have represented the qualities of a king, strong, enduring, but watchful and wise. Covering it in gold made it more than a symbol. It became a sacred emblem, a guardian of the throne. Close your eyes and imagine Mapung as it once was. On the top of the hill, the ruling elite lived, looking down on the valley below, where farmers and craftsmen worked. The sun set over the plains, and the glow of firelight flickered on the stone walls. Gold traded from the rivers and mines nearby, gleamed in ornaments, in jewelry, in sacred figures like the rhino, ivory, glass beads from India, porcelain from China, all passed through this kingdom, carried along vast trade routes that connected Africa to the wider world. The golden rhino was part of this story. It was not an isolated object, but a fragment of a golden age, a time when Mapungu was the heart of a thriving society. Centuries before the rise of Great Zimbabwe, centuries before Europeans set foot on these lands. And yet, despite its splendor, Mapung did not last. Around the 13th century, the kingdom declined. The climate may have shifted, trade routes may have changed, political struggles may have weakened the state. Slowly, the hill fell silent. The people moved on. The graves were closed. The treasures forgot. For 700 years, the golden rhino slept beneath the soil. When it was rediscovered, the world was not ready to accept its story. During apartheid in South Africa, the golden rhino was hidden away, locked in university vaults, shielded from the public. To acknowledge it was to acknowledge that advanced African civilizations had flourished long before colonial times, a truth that the government of that era wished to suppress. For decades, the rhino waited in silence again, unseen, unspoken, denied. But history cannot be silenced forever. Today, the golden rhino is displayed with pride in the Mapungubu Museum. It has become a national symbol of South Africa. Appearing on currency in art in schools, children learn of the kingdom of Mapungub and how their ancestors built societies rich in trade, culture, and power. The rhino is no longer hidden. It shines in the light once more. Standing before it, you might be surprised by its size, so small, so fragile. And yet, as you look closer, you realize that its power does not lie in its scale. It lies in what it represents. This little golden animal carries the memory of a forgotten kingdom. It tells us that greatness is not only found in massive monuments or towering statues. Sometimes it is found in the careful beating of gold onto wood in the hands of an artisan, shaping an animal into eternity. Imagine the artisan at work sitting in the dim light of a hut, hammering thin sheets of gold, pressing them gently against the carved wooden form of the rhino. Each tap of the tool a heartbeat, each line a prayer. Perhaps this was not just an object. Perhaps it was a ritual. Perhaps the rhino was made to accompany a king in death to serve as his guardian in the afterlife. Or perhaps it was a symbol of rule held aloft during ceremonies, gleaming in the sunlight, a reminder of strength and power. We may never know for certain. The voices of Mapingu are long gone, their stories carried away in the winds of time, but the golden rhino remains. And when you see it, when you let your eyes linger on its simple, delicate shape, you feel that presence. You feel the echo of a kingdom that refused to be forgotten. The golden rhino teaches us something important. It teaches us that history is not always written in books. Sometimes it is written on the earth, waiting to be uncovered. Sometimes it is written in gold, small enough to fit in your hand, but powerful enough to change how we see the world. So the next time you think of Africa's past, do not think only of silence or of emptiness. Think of Mapnu Bay. Think of a hill crowned with shrines and treasures. Think of a kingdom that thrived on trade and art. And think of the golden rhino standing quietly, its head bowed, its body gleaming, a reminder that the spirit of Africa is strong, enduring, and eternal. In the stillness of that artifact, in the shimmer of its gold, you can almost hear the whispers of a forgotten king. His kingdom may have vanished. His people may have moved on, but his memory, his symbol, still shines. And like the rhino itself, it endures, the tomb of the griffin warrior. In the olive groves of southwestern Greece, not far from the ancient palace of Pios, there lies a tomb that has rewritten what we thought we knew about early Greece. Buried for more than 3,500 years, undisturbed, untouched, forgotten by time, it waited patiently beneath the soil. And then in 2015, archaeologists stumbled upon it, a grave so rich, so powerful in its silence that the world now knows it as the tomb of the griffin warrior. The name comes from a small seal stone found inside, carved with the image of a mythic griffin, a creature half eagle, half lion. The griffin, a guardian between worlds, a symbol of strength and divine power. And so the man within the tomb, though his real name is lost, is remembered today as the Griffin Warrior. When the excavation began, no one expected what lay beneath the stones. The archaeologists thought they might find the remains of a simple warrior, perhaps a few broken pots, some weathered bones. But as they brushed away the earth, the tomb began to reveal a story unlike any other. Inside, the skeleton of a man laid carefully with weapons by his side. A bronze sword, a dagger, armor fit for battle, and not just tools of war, but treasures of beauty, gold rings, carved beads, fine combs, inlaid weapons glittering with ivory and precious stones. There were more than 1,500 artifacts packed into the single grave, a treasure hoard for the afterlife, untouched for millennia. The Griffin Warrior was not a pharaoh in Egypt, not a great king of Mesopotamia, not a ruler known from books or inscriptions, and yet his burial rivaled theirs in wealth. This one man was buried around 1450 B. CE seemed to hold within his tomb a bridge between two worlds, the world of the Masons and the older world of the Manoans from Cree, for in his grave were objects that spoke of both cultures. The Masonian bronze weapons, heavy, strong, built for war, and the Minoan works of art. Delicate seal stones carved with scenes so intricate they could only be made by masters of craft. One of them, known as the Pios combat agate, was so finely carved that even under modern microscopes the detail is astonishing. Warriors clash, muscles strain, swords meet shields in a moment frozen forever. It is a masterpiece small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. Who was this man, this Griffin Warrior who commanded such treasures? Was he a warlord, a king, a priest? Some suggest he was a chieftain who rose to power during a turbulent age when Macedonian Greece was just beginning to dominate the Aeon. Others believe he was chosen as a bridge, a figure who carried the traditions of Cree into the new Greek world. Whatever the answer, his burial shows that he was not just respected, he was revered. Close your eyes and imagine his funeral. The body of the warrior laid upon the ground, his bronze sword placed by his hand. Gold rings slipped onto his fingers, necklaces of beads draped over his chest, perfume jars, combs, carved ivory, every detail of life and death prepared for him. And then stone by stone, the tomb sealed, the earth above covering it, the olive groves growing silent over time. For 3,500 years, no one touched it. No grave robbers disturbed it. No farmer's plow reached it. Only silence, only time. And then, when it was found, the tomb seemed to breathe again. The artifacts gleamed as though they had just been placed there. The seal stones still shone. The gold still glimmered. It was as if the griffin warrior himself had been waiting to be remembered. But the story does not end with the treasures, for his bones too speak. Studies of his skeleton show that he was in his 30s when he died, strong, tall for his time, a man accustomed to the weight of weapons. His teeth showed signs of wealth, his bones signs of good health. Unlike many of his contemporaries, this was no ordinary man. This was someone who lived at the center of power, and yet the tomb raises more questions than it answers. Why was he buried here near the palace of Netter in Pios, a site that would later become legendary in Homer's Tales? Why was his grave left untouched when so many others were looted long ago? Was he protected by myth, by fear, by reverence, or simply forgotten by chance? The Griffin Warrior's tomb is a reminder that history is never fixed, just when we think we understand the past. A single discovery can open new doors. Before 2015, scholars thought that Myanaeans simply borrowed from the Manoans, imitating their art, their traditions. But the Griffin Warrior's tomb shows something deeper, a merging of worlds, a blending of cultures, a man who stood at the heart of transformation. And so the griffin, the creature carved on the seal stone, seems almost prophetic. Half lion, half eagle, a being of two natures. The Griffin Warrior was just that, a man of two worlds, standing between Manon and Mycenaean, carrying the strength of both into the future. Today, the treasures of his tomb are studied carefully in museums and universities. The Pios combat agate has been called one of the greatest works of prehistoric art ever discovered. The gold rings shine under glass, their delicate engravings showing scenes of gods and rituals long forgotten. And the man himself, his bones carefully preserved, still lies at the center of mystery. In the stillness of the museum, when you look at the artifacts, you may feel what those first archaeologists felt, the weight of time collapsing. The presence of a man who lived and died 3,500 years ago. His tomb was not just a grave, it was a message waiting for us to listen. The Griffin Warrior will never speak again. But through his treasures, through his gold and his stones, through the myth of the griffin that guards him, he whispers to us still. A warrior, a leader, a bridge between worlds, a man whose story was buried in silence, but whose memory has risen again. And as the olive trees sway gently in the winds of Pios, their roots tangled in ancient soil, the earth remembers. The Griffin Warrior endures. The oracle bones of the Shang dynasty. In the heart of ancient China more than 3,000 years ago, there lived a people who believed that the world was never silent, that the voices of the past, of the ancestors, of the spirits of heaven and earth were always speaking. To hear them, to understand their whispers, one had to know where to look. And so in the age of the Shang dynasty, kings and priests turned to something simple, something fragile yet eternal. They turned to bones. These were not ordinary bones. They were the oracle bones, the oldest written records of China, the first whispers of a civilization that would one day grow into one of the greatest in the world. Imagine it. The year is somewhere between 1200 and 1045 BCE. The Shang kings rule from their great capital at Anyang. Bronze vessels gleam in their temples, warriors march in their armies, and shamans call upon the spirits of the heavens. And in the royal court before the king himself, a diver kneels. In his hands he holds a fragment of bone, perhaps the shoulder blade of an ox, perhaps the shell of a turtle. Upon its surface are thin cracks running like veins, but these cracks are not random. They are messages waiting to be read. The diver places the bone into the fire. Heat spreads across it, and suddenly a loud crack echoes in the silence.
The bone splits, branching lines stretch outward, and the diver bends low to study them. To him, these are not accidents of heat. They are the very language of the spirits. They are answers to questions asked by kings, and what questions they were. The oracle bones tell us of worries, of battles, of births, of deaths. Will the harvest be good? Shall we go to war against our enemies? Will the queen give birth to a son? Will the rains come? Each crack was a response from the ancestors. A bridge between the world of men and the unseen powers that shaped their destiny. But what makes these bones so haunting, so powerful, is not only the cracks, but the writing carved beside them. The earliest form of Chinese characters. Sharp, deliberate strokes etched into bone. Each mark an ancestor of the language still alive today. These symbols record the king's question, the diver's reading, and sometimes even the outcome. They are history, carved into bone, preserved by fire. When the bones were buried, No one could have imagined that one day, thousands of years later, they would be unearthed by farmers plowing their fields. For centuries, the oracle bones lay forgotten beneath the soil until the late 19th century. At that time, people called them dragon bones. They were ground into powders, sold in markets, believed to cure illness. Healers crushed the bones of kings, not knowing they held the first chapters of China's story. It was only when scholars noticed the strange markings on these fragments that their true importance began to emerge. These were not random scratches. These were words, a hidden library waiting in the dust of tombs and fields. Today, more than 100,000 oracle bones have been found, and together they reveal a portrait of a people whose lives were bound to the rhythms of heaven and earth. They show us that the Shang kings were not only warriors but priests, mediators between the human and the divine. They ruled not just with armies, but with rituals, seeking guidance before every major decision. Close your eyes and picture the court of the Shang. The king was robed in animal skins and jewels of jade, seated high upon a throne. Before him, the diver held the bone carefully as though it were alive. A question is whispered. The fire burns. The crack resounds. The diver leans forward, reading the fissures like veins of destiny. And then he carves the answer, forever fixing it into history. The questions carved on these bones may seem simple, but they are also profoundly human. A father asks about the health of his child. A ruler asks whether his army will be victorious. A farmer asks whether the rains will bless the soil. Beneath the weight of ritual and ceremony, we see the same hopes and fears that fill human hearts today. And yet there is something eerie about the silence of these bones. For we can read their words, but we cannot hear the voices that once spoke them. The cracks, the strokes of the knife, the fire's breath, all of it is gone. What remains are fragments, thousands of small windows into a world both familiar and strange. Some of the oracle bones still carry the smell of fire. Some are stained dark with age. On them, the characters are sharp, as if carved yesterday. You can trace the lines with your finger and feel the hand of a scribe who lived 3,000 years ago. It is like touching time itself. But beyond their beauty and mystery, the oracle bones carry weight. They show us the earliest form of bureaucracy, of government guided not only by power, but by ritual. They reveal that the Shang believed deeply in the power of ancestors, that the dead continued to influence the living. To rule a kingdom was to consult those who had come before. Even now, scholars study the characters on the bones. Some have transformed directly into the words of modern Chinese. Others remain undeciphered, shadows of meanings lost. Each bone is a puzzle, a piece of a language still alive but forever changing. And perhaps most mysterious of all is the thought of how many bones still lie beneath the earth, buried in tombs yet undiscovered. Entire histories, whole conversations with the gods, waiting in silence. The oracle bones are not merely relics, they are voices. Voices of kings and priests, of mothers and fathers, of a people who believed that every crack in a bone could carry the weight of the world. And as you listen to them, even now across the gulf of time, they remind us that the questions of the past are not so different from our own. Will the harvest be good? Will the rains come? Will the future be kind to us? Questions carved in bone. Questions whispered into fire. Questions that echo still, unanswered, yet eternal. The oracle bones of the Shang dynasty are more than archaeology. They are the heartbeat of the world's oldest living civilization, captured in fragments of bone and shell. They remind us that to seek meaning in the universe is as old as humanity itself. And as long as we keep asking, perhaps the spirits still listen. The royal tombs of Earth, in the land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, there once rose a city so ancient, so powerful that its very name became a whisper of the dawn of civilization. This was a jewel of Mesopotamia, a place where kings ruled, priests prayed, and treasures glittered beneath the desert sun. But beneath the soil hidden for thousands of years, there lay something even greater, something that would astonish the modern world when it was uncovered in the 1920s. These were the royal tombs of vast burial chambers filled with unimaginable riches, golden headdresses, silver lyres, lapis lazuli beads, jeweled daggers, and ornaments that seemed to hold the light of the ancient world. Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. The year is around 2600 BCE. The city of Ra is alive with the sounds of markets and temples, the chants of priests rising toward the ziggurat, that massive step pyramid that towered over the city. But just outside this bustling life, in the sacred burial grounds, something solemn is taking place. A king has died. A queen has passed. And with them, not only their treasures, but their followers, their attendants, their soldiers, even their musicians are being led into death. For the royal tombs were not simple graves. They were entire worlds beneath the earth, great pits carved into the soil where rulers were laid to rest with everything they might need in the afterlife. Their treasures, their chariots, their animals, and most haunting of all, their people. Dozens of attendants dressed in fine clothes, wearing jewelry of gold and lapis, lying silently beside their rulers. Archaeologists who first looked upon this scene described it as breathtaking and yet terrifying. For these were not ordinary burials. They were sacrifices. Human lives ended so that kings and queens might not enter the next world alone. The greatest of these discoveries was the tomb of Queen Pwabi. Her name, still legible on a cylinder seal found in her grave, tells us that she was no mere consort, but a ruler in her own right. And her tomb, it was filled with treasures that spoke of a world both rich and mysterious. A golden headdress with delicate leaves and flowers, crafted so finely that even today it seems alive. Beads of carnelian and lapis lazuli, their colors, still vibrant after 4,500 years. A gaming board, instruments, cups of gold and silver. Each piece is not just a treasure, but a story. Imagine the last moments of Queen Pwabi's attendants, musicians laying down their lyres, servants adjusting their jeweled headbands, guards polishing their spears one final time, then silence. They followed their queen into eternity. Their bodies are placed neatly in rows as though asleep. Even now, you can almost hear the last notes of their songs echoing in the dust of the tomb. When Sir Leonard Woolley, the archaeologist leading the excavations in the 1920s, uncovered these chambers, he was stunned. No one had ever seen burials like this. And the world, reading the reports, was equally astonished. It was as if the tombs had been sealed yesterday. So vivid were the treasures, so haunting the scenes. And yet, the royal tombs are more than a collection of riches. They are windows into the heart of the world's first great civilizations. They show us a people who believed that life and death were not separate, but one, that the afterlife was a continuation of this world, and that rulers should carry with them their wealth, their power, and their people into the next. There is a rhythm to these discoveries, a harp of silver and gold, silent for millennia, still carries the shape of strings that once filled the air with music. A golden cup, dulled by time, still glimmers faintly when light strikes its edge. Jewelry once worn by living women now lies frozen on earth. Objects meant to be touched, to be used, to be admired, trapped in silence, waiting for thousands of years to be found again. But there is also unease. For what we see in the tombs is not just beauty, but death. The attendants were not buried by choice. Many of their skulls bear signs of blunt force trauma. Some may have been given poison. They were sacrifices to a system of belief that demanded loyalty beyond life itself. The treasures also speak of connections that stretched far beyond Mesopotamia. lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian from India, gold from distant lands. The tombs show us that even at this early time, the people were part of a vast interconnected world. A world of trade, of culture, of exchange. A world far larger than we might expect for 4,000 years ago. And yet, for all the splendor, for all the wealth, one cannot help but feel sorrow when standing before these artifacts today. In the halls of museums, Queen Porby's headdress glitters beneath artificial lights. Her jewelry is displayed behind glass. Her attendants who gave their lives to follow her lie in silence. What once was ritual, sacred, and alive is now archaeology. Still, when you look closely at the treasures of ore, you cannot help but feel the heartbeat of a civilization long gone. You can imagine the music of the lyres, the golden crown swaying in firelight, the chants of priests calling upon the gods, and you begin to sense that the people of our, though distant in time, were not so different from us. They loved beauty. They sought meaning. They dreamed of life after death. The royal tombs of ore are not simply graves. They are stories. Stories of kings and queens, of loyalty and sacrifice, of music and silence, of treasures both dazzling and tragic. They remind us that the past is never truly gone. It lies beneath the earth, waiting, whispering until someone listens. And so, as we leave the tombs behind, as we close the doors of the chambers in our minds, we carry with us a question. A question carved not in gold or silver, but in the silence of history. What does it mean to live? And what does it mean to follow another into eternity? The royal tombs hold no easy answers, but they offer us something perhaps even more powerful. They offer us the chance to wonder. The tomb of Paco the Great, in the lush jungles of Chiapas, Mexico, hidden beneath a canopy of green, where parrots call and howler monkeys echo across the valley, stands the ruined city of Palenque. And within its heart lies one of the most extraordinary discoveries in all of Mesoamerican history. The tomb of Paco the Great. Kinich, Janabia Pacal, often simply called Pacal, was one of the greatest rulers of the Maya. He lived in the 7th century CE, a time when Palenque was at its height, a city of towering temples, intricate carvings, and sacred knowledge. Paco ruled for nearly 70 years, an extraordinary span of time, leading his people through prosperity, building monuments that still stand today, and weaving himself into the mythology of kingship. But what makes Pacal unforgettable is not only the city he built or the years he reigned, but what was discovered beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions in 1952. Imagine the scene. For centuries, the temple had stood silent, its stairways crumbled, its chambers filled with the whispers of the jungle. But one day, Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruiz-Luillier noticed something unusual: a series of stone slabs in the temple, floor sealed as though hiding a secret. He began excavating. Years of careful work followed. Stone after stone was removed, and then a stairway was revealed, descending deep into the earth, into the very heart of the temple. It was as though the Maya had hidden a secret passageway waiting to be uncovered more than 1,000 years later. At the bottom of that stairway lay a massive chamber, and within it something no one had expected. A giant sarcophagus, its lid weighing several tons, covered with intricate carvings. When it was finally opened, archaeologists gazed upon the remains of Pascal the Great himself, dressed in jade and surrounded by offerings meant to carry him into eternity. His face was covered by a delicate jade death mask fitted piece by piece like a mosaic. His hands held ornaments, his body adorned with jewels. Around him lay treasures and symbolic items, all carefully placed to ensure his journey to the other world. But it was not just the man that astonished the world. The sarcophagus lid carved into the massive stone is one of the most famous and mysterious images in all of archaeology. It shows Pace lying back, his body tilted, surrounded by symbols of the cosmos. A great tree rises above him, the world tree of Maya mythology, connecting the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. At the base of the carving, jaws of the underworld gape open. Above, celestial symbols glimmer. The palace is caught between realms at the moment of death and transformation. To the Maya, this was a sacred vision of rebirth. Pascal was not merely a man. He was becoming divine, joining the cycles of the gods, rising into eternity. The carving was a map of his journey into the afterlife, a promise that death was not the end, but a passage. And yet, when the modern world saw this image, not everyone agreed on its meaning. Some looked at Pakel's reclining figure, at the way he seems to reach forward with his hands, at the strange shapes around him, and claimed it was not mythology at all, but something else entirely. Some suggested that Pakel was not ascending into the heavens of the Maya gods, but rather seated in some kind of machine, a rocket, an ancient spacecraft. This idea, known as the ancient astronaut theory, captured the imagination of many. Was Pascal the Great not only a king but a traveler among the stars? Was this carving not a myth, but a memory of contact with beings beyond our world? Most scholars firmly reject this interpretation, pointing instead to rich Maya cosmology. But still, the image lingers. Once seen, it is difficult to forget. Whether one sees mythology or machinery, the carving reminds us of the depth of Maya imagination, and the mystery still locked within their stone. Pakel's tomb itself is equally breathtaking. The chamber walls are carved with scenes of his ancestors surrounding him in death, just as they did in life. Offerings of shells, bones, and precious stones filled the chamber. For centuries, the tomb had remained untouched, sealed by the Maya themselves to protect their king for eternity. And yet, in 1952, the seal was broken, and Pakel's story once again returned to light. When we think of tombs, we often think of Egypt, of pyramids and pharaohs. But here in the jungles of Mexico, the Maya created something just as grand, just as powerful. The Temple of the Inscriptions rising above the tomb is a monument not only of stone, but of time itself. Each inscription carved into its walls records the deeds of Pakel, the lineage of kings, the stories of gods. It is both history and myth woven together. Close your eyes and picture it. The year is 6083 CE. The city of Pallene mourns. The great ruler Pakel is gone. Priests chant. Incense burns. Drums echo through the plaza. Slowly, carefully, his body is carried into the temple, down the hidden stairway, into the chamber prepared for him. He's laid into the sarcophagus, dressed in jade, his mask covering his face. The lid is lowered, sealing him into eternity. Above, the temple rises, a beacon for all time, and there he remained for more than 1,000 years, silent in darkness, as the jungle grew above, as empires rose and fell, as the world forgot. Until one day, the seal was broken, and the king was seen once more. Pakel the Great was more than a man. He was a symbol, a ruler whose reign shaped Pallene, a figure whose tomb still stirs imagination. His sarcophagus lid continues to spark debate. Is it a myth or is it something more? His jade mask still gleams as though alive. His story, though carved in stone, still breathes. The tomb of Pakel the Great reminds us that death was never the end for the Maya. It was a passage, a transformation, a return to the cosmic cycle. And for us, looking back across 13 centuries, it is a reminder that the past holds mysteries we may never fully understand. Perhaps that is the true power of Pakel's tomb. It does not give us answers. It gives us questions that whisper in the quiet of the jungle, that echo in the chambers of stone, that linger when we gaze upon the carving of a king who may be rising or flying or simply dreaming beneath the world tree. And so we left Palanque. We leave the Temple of the Inscriptions, but Paco remains a ruler not only of his people, but of time itself. His legacy carved in stone, his spirit forever bound to the stars, the golden treasure of Priam. Beneath the windswept plains of northwestern Turkey, where the earth rolls gently toward the Asian Sea, there once stood a city spoken of in legends, sung by poets, and remembered in whispers for thousands of years. A city of warriors and kings, of battles and beauty, of betrayal and glory. That city was Troy. For centuries, many believed Troy was nothing more than a story, a myth woven by Homer in the Iliad, a tale of gods and men, of Achilles and Hector, of Helen whose beauty launched 1,000 ships. But in the 19th century, one man set out to prove that Troy was not just a legend. His name was Heinrich Schlien, a self-taught archaeologist, a dreamer obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the epic poems. Schliemann's journey was as controversial as it was ambitious. He was no quiet academic. He was fiery, determined, and sometimes reckless. Yet, it was his relentless vision that led him to a low hill called his in modern-day Turkey, where he believed the ruins of Troy lay buried beneath centuries of earth and stone. In the 1870s, after years of digging, Schlien made a discovery that would shake the world. As his workers dug deeper into the layers of rubble, they uncovered a magnificent cache of objects, gleaming ornaments, weapons, vessels, and diadems of gold dot. It was a dazzling sight, a hoard of treasure so breathtaking that Schlien immediately declared it to be nothing less than the treasure of King Priam, the legendary ruler of Troy himself. Imagine the scene: the summer sun burning above, dust rising from the trenches, and suddenly buried beneath the soil, an ancient glow, gold ornaments, crowns, chains, earrings, bracelets, brooch, all shimmering in the light after lying hidden for more than 3,000 years. Copper shields, bronze daggers, silver cups, all carefully crafted as if left behind in a forgotten treasury. Among the most famous of these objects was the golden diadem, a crown woven from delicate threads of gold, said to have been worn by the women of ancient Troy. Schliemann, ever dramatic, placed it upon the head of his wife, Sophia, and photographed her wearing it, calling her the new Helen of Troy. That image spread across the world, igniting imaginations, fueling headlines, and forever entwining myth with archaeology. But was it truly Primos? Treasure? That question has haunted scholars ever since. Schliemann's methods were bold, but also destructive. In his eagerness to dig, he cut through layers of settlement, sometimes destroying evidence that could have told a clearer story. What he found, the Golden Hoard, did not actually belong to the time of Poemon or the Trojan War, as described by Homer. Instead, most scholars now agree the treasure was much older, dating to the early Bronze Age, at least 1,000 years before the supposed fall of Troy. So perhaps it was not Priam's treasure at all. Perhaps it was a treasure of another king, another people whose names are lost to history. Yet Schlien's bold proclamation captured the world's imagination. And even today, many still call it Priam's treasure, a name too powerful to let go. The treasure itself has lived a life as dramatic as the legends. After its discovery, Schliemann smuggled much of it out of Turkey, hiding it from authorities. It passed through Germany, displayed in Berlin's museums as proof of Troy's reality. But then, during World War II, it vanished. As bombs rained on Berlin and armies closed in, the treasure disappeared. For decades, it was thought lost forever. Another victim of war. But in 1993, long after the Cold War ended, a revelation came. Hidden in the vaults of the Pushkin Museum in Moscow, the treasure resurfaced. Soviet soldiers had taken it as war booty at the end of World War II, a secret kept for nearly half a century. Today, it remains in Moscow. Its ownership is still fiercely debated between Turkey, Germany, and Russia. A treasure caught not only in myth, but in modern politics. And so, the story of Priam's treasure continues. A tale that began in Homer's epic that passed through scullions, fiery hands that vanished in the smoke of war, and that reappeared in secret vaults decades later. But perhaps the most haunting part of the story is not the gold itself, but what it represents. For Schleien, it was proof that the myths were real, that Homer's Troy was not just a story, but a city of stone and blood. For us, it is a reminder that history and legend are always intertwined. The gold has a way of shining across time, even when buried in the earth. Close your eyes and picture it. A small hill in Turkey, a man driven by dreams, scraping away the soil. And then suddenly, a gleam of gold that had not seen the sun for 3,000 years. The gleam of a treasure that may not belong to Pri, but that still whispers of Troy. The diadems, the cups, the weapons, they tell us of a people long gone, of craftsmanship unmatched, of wealth and power that once flowed through the ancient Aeon world. Whether prey or not, the treasure is a bridge between myth and archaeology, between story and fact, between the world of Homer and the soil beneath our feet. And so the treasure of Pri remains more than just objects of gold god. It is a symbol of humanity's endless quest to uncover its past, a symbol of our fascination with myth, with glory, with the shining fragments of lost worlds. Perhaps, in the end, it does not matter if the gold truly belonged to Pri. What matters is that it was found, that it was saved from the silence of the earth, that it continues to speak in whispers, in legends, in the quiet halls of museums where it waits. The golden treasure of Pri is not just a discovery. It is a story of obsession, of myth, of loss and rediscovery. A story that reminds us that somewhere beneath our feet, in hills and valleys, in forgotten ruins and silent mounds, treasures still wait. Treasures that shine not only with gold, but with the light of memory, the golden hat of Schifferstadt, in a quiet German town called Scheifers, where the fields ripple gently with the wind and the soil has witnessed centuries of footsteps. A discovery was made that still glimmers like sunlight, caught in ancient memory. Beneath the earth in 1835-3, farmers unearthed something extraordinary. Not a sword, not a crown, not a treasure chest, but a tall conical hat of pure gold. It was delicate, yet dazzling. Thin sheets of hammered gold patterned with mysterious rings, dots, and bands. Standing more than 30 centimeters tall, this golden hat was unlike anything ever seen before. It was no ordinary object of decoration. It was something far older, far stranger, and far more mysterious. This artifact, now known as the Golden Hat of Schifferstadt, belongs to the Bronze Age, more than 3,000 years ago, when Europe was still a land of forests, rivers, and small tribal communities. But the hat itself was not made for everyday use. It was too fragile, too precious, too unique. It carried symbols, patterns, and knowledge that scholars believe held cosmic meaning. When you look closely at the hat's surface, you see rows of repeating sun disks, rings, and dotted lines. They are not just decorations. They are calculations. Hidden within these symbols is a prehistoric calendar capable of tracking the cycles of the sun and moon, predicting eclipses and guiding agricultural life. Imagine that for a moment. In a time before books, before compasses, before writing even reached much of Europe, a community of Bronze Age people crafted a golden object that served not only as a ritual headdress, but also as a portable observatory of the heavens. Whoever wore it carried with them the knowledge of the stars. But who wore such a hat? Most scholars believe it was the priests, the shamans, the astronomers of the Bronze Age world. They were not kings in the sense we imagine, but they held a different kind of power. the power to read the skies, to predict the rhythms of time, to declare the days of planting and harvest, of ritual and rest to their people. They were mediators between earth and sky, between the human world and the divine. Picture it now, a summer solstice evening. The air is still. The tribe gathers around a great fire, and emerging from the shadows comes a figure clad in ceremonial robes. Their face half lit by the flames, a towering golden hat shimmering in the firelight. Every movement catches the glow reflecting the sun and the stars. To the people, this was not just a man or woman. This was a vessel of cosmic knowledge, someone who carried the sun itself upon their head. The golden hat of Schifferdo is not alone. Over the years, other similar hats have been found across Europe and Berlin, Aventon and E.Z. Dorf. Each one carries its own patterns, its own coded system of time. Together, they suggest a wide cultural network in Bronze Age Europe, a shared belief in the sun, in cycles, in the sacred connection between humanity and the cosmos. And yet, the mystery remains: how did these people, without telescopes, without written mathematics, manage to encode such precise astronomical knowledge into gold? Were these the first scientists, their wisdom cloaked in ritual? Or was this knowledge passed to them from older civilizations, now forgotten? The shifters do that which was discovered buried upside down, as if deliberately placed into the ground as an offering. Perhaps it was a sacred burial, returning the power of the sun to the earth. Perhaps it was hidden away to protect it from enemies, or perhaps, as some whisper, it was part of a ritual in which the hat was never meant to be worn again, only given back to the gods. When the farmers first found it, they thought it was simply a strange golden pot. They had no idea they had uncovered one of the greatest treasures of Europe's deep past. Today, it rests in a museum, carefully guarded, still gleaming with the same golden brilliance that once mesmerized its ancient people. But when you stand before it, you feel something more than just admiration for its beauty. You feel its weight, not physical, for it is light, but symbolic. It carries within it the dreams of an age long before us. The desire to understand the sky, the longing to connect with the sun, the moon, the stars, the eternal human urge to find order in the heavens. Close your eyes and imagine yourself back in that time. The forests stretching endlessly, the rivers cutting paths through the land, the nights filled with stars brighter than we can see today. And in the center of it all, a figure crowned in gold, reading the sky like a book, guiding the people with knowledge preserved in shining metal. The golden hat of Schifferstadt is more than a hat. It is a timekeeper, a crown of the cosmos, a reminder that even in the Bronze Age, people gazed upward with wonder, seeking to understand their place in the universe. And so this hat, fragile, golden, mysterious, still speaks dotted whispers of rituals. Lost to time, of nights spent watching the sky, of the unbroken chain of curiosity that links us to our ancestors. For even today, as we peer through telescopes and send probes into space, we are still doing what they once did, searching the heavens, measuring the cycles, trying to bring the vastness of the cosmos into the palm of our hands. The golden hat is proof that long before our modern calendars and machines, humans found their own way of keeping time. And in doing so, they left behind not just an artifact, but a golden reminder of our eternal dance with the stars. The idol of Kamakia, high on the hills of Nalachol and Assam, where the mist curls over the ancient stones and the sound of bells mingles with the chants of pilgrims, lies one of India's most mysterious and powerful sacred sites, the Kamakia Temple. Unlike other temples, where gods and goddesses appear in human form here, the divine is worshipped in an ancient elemental way, and deep within its dark inner sanctum rests an idol not of a face, not of a body, but of pure symbol carved into the living stone of the earth itself. This is the idol of Kamakia, a sacred form of the mother goddess, worshipped not as a statue, but as a natural rock, shaped like the yoni, the source of creation. It is not polished, not gilded, not adorned in gold like other idols of the world. Instead, it is raw, timeless, and eternal, a cleft in stone covered by water that flows throughout the year, symbolizing the ever-living energy of the goddess. For thousands of years, this idol has drawn seekers, priests, kings, and pilgrims. They descend into the sanctum, where the air is heavy with incense and oil lamps flicker against the walls. There is no sunlight here, only the dim glow of flames, the sound of chants, and the constant trickle of water, as if the earth itself breathes in rhythm with the goddess. But what makes the idol of Kamakia so extraordinary is not only its form, but the layers of history and mystery that surround it. Some say the temple stands upon one of the Shaktipos, the sacred sites where pieces of the goddess Sati fell upon the earth after her fiery death. At Kamakia, it is said, fell into her womb. And so, the idol here has been revered as the seed of fertility, creation, and cosmic power. This worship stretches back into the ancient past, long before the temple's current walls were built. The cult of Kamakia is believed to be rooted in prehistoric traditions, when the earliest peoples of Assam worshipped the earth and the mother as the source of life. Later, as Hindu traditions evolved, these older rituals merged with the goddess cults, creating a temple unlike any other in India. What does this mean for the idol itself? Unlike statues of gods carved in stone, bronze, or gold, the idol of Kamakia resists definition. It is not a person, not a figure, but a force. A reminder that before gods were imagined in human form, they were felt in the raw powers of nature and earth, water, fertility, and life itself. Rituals at Kamakia are equally mysterious. Every year during the Ambabashi Mela, the temple closes for 3 days. It is believed that during this time, the goddess herself undergoes menstruation. When the temple reopens, the water flowing over the idol is distributed among pilgrims, sacred and red in hue, symbolizing fertility and renewal. Nowhere else in the world is such a ritual practiced where divinity is tied so closely to the natural human cycles of life. Scholars, archaeologists, and mystics alike have tried to trace the true origins of the idol. Was it first worshipped in megalithic times, when earth goddesses ruled the imagination of early tribes? Was it shaped deliberately or revealed naturally in stone? And why has it endured through centuries of dynasties, invasions, and changes in faith when so many other traditions faded into memory? Even today, when you enter the temple, there is a sense that time itself slows. The idol does not dazzle with gold or jewels, but it draws you in with something deeper, a primal, unshaped energy, something that cannot be explained in words, but only felt in silence. It is as though the stone itself whispers of beginnings, of the first breath, the first seed, the first dawn of creation. Travelers who have visited Kamakia speak of the unease and awe it inspires. Some call it mystical, others unsettling. For in that dark chamber, you do not look upon a face, but into a symbol older than memory, one that speaks of life and death, fertility and destruction, all at once. The idol of Kamakia is not just an object of worship, it is a living mystery. A reminder that before humans sought gods in the heavens, they first found them in the earth, in water, and the eternal cycles of nature. To stand before, it is to feel that you are standing at the threshold of creation itself. And so the idol remains, not shaped by the chisel of man, but by the will of time and tradition, covered in flowers, bathed in water, hidden in shadows, and alive in belief that the goddess is not seen, but she is present, not carved, but eternal. And those who come to Kamaka know in their hearts that they are in the presence of something far older than history, far deeper than faith. The idol of Kamaka is not just a stone. It is a portal to the oldest human understanding of the sacred, that life itself is divine, and creation is the greatest mystery of all. The tomb of the Lord of Sepon, in the arid lands of northern Peru, where the desert sands stretch into the horizon and the mountains stand as ancient guardians, there lies a discovery so extraordinary that it has been called the Tutankhamun of the America's God, a tomb that for centuries lay hidden beneath layers of earth and silence until one night in 1987, the world was reintroduced to the splendor of the Mocha civilization. This was the resting place of the Lord of Sepon, a ruler, a warrior, a priest, a man who carried both earthly power and divine authority. His tomb was untouched, unspoiled, and filled with treasures that reveal a world long forgotten. When archaeologists first opened the burial chamber, they were stunned. Before them lay not only the skeletal remains of the Lord himself, but an entire court preserved in death. Beside him were warriors, servants, women, even a child, all sacrificed to accompany him into the afterlife. There were llamas buried too, carry his spirit on its eternal journey, and all around him, treasures gleamed in the faint light of the excavator's lamps: gold, silver, turquoise, shells, copper. The room shimmered like the reflection of sunlight on water. He wore a golden headdress, large ear ornaments that glowed in the darkness, necklaces strung with rare stones, and intricate ornaments shaped like warriors, animals, and gods. The richness of the tomb told a story. This was not just a man. This was a living bridge between the Moshe people and their gods. The Moshe civilization flourished along the Peruvian coast nearly 2,000 years ago, long before the rise of the Inca. They were masterful artisans, warriors, and engineers. Their pottery tells us stories of rituals, battles, sacrifices, and daily life. Their temples, built from adobe bricks, rise in tiers against the desert sky, and their burials, like that of the Lord of Sepon, reveal the hierarchy and sacred beliefs that guided their world. The tomb itself was carefully constructed with layers upon layers of chambers. Each level represented not only wealth, but status, power, and cosmic meaning. For the Moshe, death was not an ending. It was a continuation, a passage into another realm. And for someone of such immense importance, the journey had to be accompanied by everything he might need: food, weapons, ornaments, and the lives of those who served him. What do we learn from this? That the Lord of Sepon was more than a political figure. He was the embodiment of divine power. His attire, reconstructed by archaeologists, reveals him dressed like the Moshe deity of the warrior priest, a godlike figure who ruled over life, death, and sacrifice. Every ornament, every piece of jewelry was symbolic. The peanuts buried with him, some of gold, some of silver, represented the male and female principles, life and fertility, sun and moon. The crescent-shaped ornaments symbolized the heavens, while the turquoise stones represented water so vital in the dry deserts where the Moshe lived. The discovery of the Lord of Sepan's tomb was nothing short of miraculous. For decades, grave robbers had looted countless Moshe sites, erasing the past for quick profit. But somehow, this tomb remained sealed, waiting patiently for its story to be told. And when it was finally uncovered, it transformed our understanding of ancient Peru. Imagine for a moment the scene. Archaeologists digging carefully under the Peruvian night, brushing away centuries of sand, the sudden glint of gold, the realization that they were standing before a burial untouched since antiquity. The silence broken only by their own breaths as history itself unveiled its treasures. The Lord of Spain's tomb is not only an archaeological marvel, it is a reminder of the fragility of time. For centuries, his name was forgotten. His people were reduced to dust. Yet within the tomb, his presence still speaks. His ornament still shines. His power still radiates. Today, much of what was found rests in museums, preserved behind glass, studied by scholars. Yet the tomb itself remains a place of mystery. Who was he truly? A king? A warrior? A priest? Was he loved, feared, or worshipped? And what songs were sung? What chants were whispered as his body was laid into the earth so long ago? The treasures tell us of wealth and ritual, but the silence tells us something more, that even the most powerful rulers, those who command armies and shape nations, eventually return to the earth. Their glory buried, their names lost until chance allows them to be remembered again. The Lord of Sapon rises from the sands of Peru as both a ruler and a mystery, a reminder that civilizations rise and fall, but the echoes of their greatness can survive in gold, in stone, and in the soil beneath our feet. When you think of his tomb, do not only imagine the glitter of treasure, imagine the dim flicker of torches in the desert night, the sound of priests chanting as the earth closed over the chamber, the silence of centuries that followed, and then the sudden shock of discovery when modern hands reached into the past and touched the golden face of a forgotten king. The Lord of Sapon lives again, not in flesh, but in story, and as long as we tell his tale, his spirit remains eternal. The sarcophagus of the Palatine Hill, high above the heart of Rome, rising gently between the bustle of the Forum and the grandeur of the Colosseum, lies a hill that has always carried whispers of the past. The Palatine Hill, one of the 7 hills of Rome, is more than just a place of ruins thought. It is the birthplace of Rome's legends, a sacred ground where myth and history meet. And hidden among its stones lies a mystery that has puzzled scholars for generations. A sarcophagus, old and silent, resting in the so-called lapis niger, the black stone shrine. It is said that the sarcophagus could belong to Rome's very first king, Romulus, the mythical founder who, according to legend, was raised by a shield and destined to carve an empire from the wilderness. Imagine the weight of such an idea that within this ancient block of tufa, beneath layers of earth and centuries of silence, may lie the remains of the man who became a god in the eyes of his people. But, as with all things Roman, the truth is wrapped in layers of history, politics, and belief. The discovery of the sarcophagus in the early 20th century stunned archaeologists. Dug deep beneath the steps of the Roman Forum, close to the very spot where Romulus was believed to have lived, they uncovered a rectangular tomb lined with stone. Beside it, inscriptions in the oldest Latin known to us, carved in letters so ancient they seemed almost alien to modern eyes. The words are broken, fragmented, yet they speak of kings, of sacred laws, and of curses that would fall upon anyone who dared to disturb the resting place. The sarcophagus itself is carved from black tufa, a volcanic stone stark and unadorned. Unlike the ornate marble tombs of later emperors, this one is severe, humble, yet powerful. No treasures were found within, no glittering gold, no statues or masks, only the block itself, resting in silence as though guarding a secret too great to reveal. For centuries, Romans themselves revered the spot. They called it the lapis niger, the black stone, and believed it marked the tomb of Romulus. Later tradition suggested it might have been the grave of other early kings, perhaps even Hostus Hostilius, one of the city's first rulers. Others whispered that it was not a grave at all, but a shrine, a symbolic place meant to embody the presence of their mythical founders. The mystery deepens when we consider the way the Romans treated this site. They built over it, around it, yet never destroyed it. Even the most powerful emperors, men who reshaped the very landscape of Rome, left a black stone untouched. This respect, this fear tells us something important. Whether or not Romulus himself lay within, the Romans believed they were standing on sacred ground, Imagine for a moment the life of early Rome, a cluster of huts on the Palatine Hill, smoke rising from fires, the voices of shepherds and warriors, blending with the cries of animals, a city not yet the Rome we imagine today, but something raw, fragile, uncertain. And in the center of it all, the story of Romulus, who slew his own brother Remy in a moment of rage and built the walls that would grow into an empire. To bury such a man in stone would not simply mark his death, but proclaim the beginning of Rome itself. The sarcophagus, though empty now, still holds the weight of that legend. To stand before it is to stand in the presence of origins. You are reminded that every empire, no matter how vast, begins with a single step, a single leader, a single story whispered across generations. Some scholars believe that the sarcophagus never held a body at all, that it was always symbolic. A cenotaph, a monument to a man who disappeared into myth. For according to Roman lore, Romulus did not die like other men. He was taken up into the heavens, transformed into a god, and became Quirinus, protector of Rome. If that story is true, then the sarcophagus is not a tomb, but a bridge between earth and sky, between history and legend. Yet others argue that the burial could have been real, that beneath the layers of earth, beneath even the sarcophagus we see today, there may be more chambers, offerings, remains long since crumbled to dust, and with them answers to questions that continue to echo through the ages. What we do know is this: the Palatine Hill was always sacred. Emperors built their palaces there. Festivals were celebrated there. And the presence of this sarcophagus, dark and silent, was a reminder of Rome's deep roots. Close your eyes and picture it. The steps of the Forum were crowded with citizens, priests in white robes passing by, carrying offerings, and in the shadow of the Senate, in the beating heart of Rome, a stone chamber whispering of kings, gods, and the birth of empire. The sarcophagus does not dazzle with gold or jewels. Its power lies in its silence, its simplicity, and the fear it inspired even in those who ruled the world. To this day, visitors to Rome can look upon the site preserved beneath protective glass. And though the city around it has changed, the feeling remains. You are standing on the threshold of mystery. You are standing where Rome itself was born. Perhaps the sarcophagus holds Romulus. Perhaps it holds another forgotten king. Or perhaps it holds nothing at all, only the way of belief, of stories told and retold, shaping a people's identity. For centuries, the sarcophagus of the Palatine Hill is more than stone. It is the echo of a beginning, a reminder that even the greatest of civilizations cling to their myths, guard their origins, and enshrine their mysteries in the heart of their cities. And so it waits in silence on the Palatine Hill, where history and legend will forever share the same shadow. The treasure of the Oxus. Far to the east, where mountains meet desert and rivers carve their way through ancient lands, there lies a treasure whose very name shimmers like gold in the memory of history. It is called the treasure of the Oxus, a hoard of dazzling artifacts buried for centuries along the banks of the great Oxus River in the land once known as Bactria. Today, it's spread across Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. The Oxus, treasure, is not simply a collection of golden objects. It is a story of empire, of faith, of artistry, and of the delicate hands that shape metal into symbols of eternity. It is a window into the ripened Persian world, into the heart of a civilization that stretched from the Mediterranean to India, binding countless peoples beneath one great rule. Imagine for a moment the river itself. Broad, powerful, endless, its waters carrying not just life, but memory. Along its banks in the 4th century BC stood temples, caravans, markets alive with voices in many tongues. Traders from India brought spices and ivory. Nomads from the steppes carried horses and wool. and somewhere in this place of mingling cultures, treasures were offered, hidden, lost, and rediscovered 2,000 years later. When the hoard was first brought to light in the late 19th century, its beauty stunned the world. Hundreds of items, cups and bracelets, plaques and amulets, coins and figurines crafted from gold, silver, and precious stones. Each piece told its own tale, and yet together they formed a symphony of empire dot. There were armbands shaped like winged griffins, creatures of myth stretching their claws as if to guard the wearer from unseen dangers. There were delicate plaques stamped with images of priests, soldiers, and kings, as though capturing the very heartbeat of Persian power. There were coins, their faces bearing the likeness of rulers who once commanded armies that shook the earth. And among them small votive figures, men and women in prayer, their hands raised toward the heavens, frozen in devotion across the centuries. The craftsmanship was beyond imagination. Each line, each curve of gold spoke of an artistry refined over generations. The Persians were masters not only of conquest but of culture. And here in the Oxus treasure, we see them not only as conquerors, but as dreamers, as worshippers, as humans who saw beauty and permanence in fragile metal. But with every treasure comes a mystery. Why was it hidden? Why along the banks of the Oxus? Some believe it was an offering, a gift to the gods of river and sky. Perhaps a temple once stood there, its sanctuaries filled with votive offerings, of gold left by pilgrims seeking divine favor. Others imagine a caravan attacked by raiders forced to bury its wealth in haste, never to return. And some whisper that it may have been the treasury of local satraps the Persian governors concealed in times of turmoil as Alexander the Great swept across the empire. The truth, like the river, remains elusive. What we do know is this: the treasure traveled far from its source. In the 19th century, pieces were collected, traded, sometimes smuggled, until eventually a great portion found its way to the British Museum, where they rest today under quiet lights. And yet, the very act of their journey has clouded their story. Records are incomplete. Archaeologists debate what was lost, what was taken, and what may still remain buried beneath the sands. But even within this uncertainty, the treasure holds its spell. To look upon those golden armbands is to feel the weight of both empire and myth. To hold a plaque of a praying figure is to sense the timeless yearning of human beings for something greater than themselves. The Oxus treasure is not merely gold. It is memory crystallized in metal. It is devotion hammered into shape. It is fear and faith captured in ornaments buried for millennia. Close your eyes for a moment and let the story unfold. Imagine the priests of Bactria, their robes flowing, their chants echoing by the riverbank as they place these golden figures upon altars. Imagine travelers resting by the Caucasus, telling stories of distant lands while treasures pass from hand to hand. Imagine the moment of hiding, the fear, the silence, the hurried burial, and the long centuries of sleep beneath the earth. Then picture the rediscovery, farmers, traders, or wanderers stumbling upon a glint of gold in the dust. The excitement, the confusion, the whispers of a treasure too powerful to belong to one person alone, and the slow winding journey of those objects across borders, across centuries, until they became part of the story of us all. The Oxus treasure carries with it not only the brilliance of gold, but the shadow of loss. For while the artifacts survive, the full truth of their origin is gone. Like the river, history flows forward, carrying with it fragments of the past, but never the whole.